Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. People in Marvel. Sign in at the beginning of God-level perception. Chapter 81. The generous Odin immediately caused Chen Yun to fall into a tangle. Treasures are optional. Why does this sound so awkward? If you can pack it all up. Taking a peek at Odin, who was full of kindness, Chen Yun finally let go of this idea. After all, it is still necessary to respect the elderly. In particular, this old man is still a god-level figure who has fought in the universe for thousands of years. Looking at the dozen or so treasures in front of him, Chen Yun suffered from difficulty in choosing. Choose Infinity Gauntlet, but the gems on it are all fake. Even if you get it, you will have to fight for the infinite gems in the future. Not to mention, Thanos also has an Infinity Gauntlet of the same style in his hand. You can wait for this guy to come to Earth in the future, even the gems will be wiped out one by one. Eternal Fire. This thing is an artifact that matches the Flame Giant Searcher. Box of Frost. Just by looking at the performance of the Frost Giants, one can tell how powerful this treasure is. A treasure handed down from generation to generation by the Supreme Mage. If it is so powerful that it will be passed down from generation to generation, how can it be passed on to Odin in Asgard? Besides, Chen Yun didn't understand magic, so if he wanted these gaudy magic equipment, he could see it but not use it. After thinking about it, Chen Yun decided to start with his own abilities. With Kaleidoscope Sharingan and Wugu Immortal Physique, my attack power is enough. And the most urgent need now. After comparing the treasure's ability with his own, Chen Yun pointed to the mysterious treasure from Atlantis. Is it a life shield? This shield, I don't know its purpose. Seeing Chen Yun's choice, Odin couldn't help being surprised. He took the shield off the wall and handed it to Chen Yun. I hope you can display its true strength. Well, I will. Turning the life shield upside down in his hand, Chen Yun didn't study it on the spot, but threw it directly into the Shinwei space. After choosing the treasure, Chen Yun reluctantly looked at the other treasures before returning to the palace with Odin. Hell is a very dangerous place. After pondering for a while, Odin finally mentioned what Chen Yun was most concerned about. At the same time, it is also called the restricted area for the living. Where is hell? After listening to Odin's narration, Chen Yun asked the key question, how should I go? It's a space sandwich between Asgard and Earth. Pointing to Chen Yun, Odin explained, with your space magic attainments, as long as you can find a weak space point in hell, you can return to Earth. In case you can't find the space point, Chen Yun frowned and asked, then I will be trapped in hell. Don't worry, if you don't find it, you can shout my name. Odin smiled and comforted, I will bring you back to Asgard from hell. I see. After listening to Odin's explanation, Chen Yun breathed a sigh of relief. Next, under the guidance of Odin, he memorized most of the routes in hell. Let's go after eating, and try our Asgard wine by the way. Looking at Chen Yun, who couldn't wait, Odin invited with a smile. Never mind. Thinking of the Asgardian food he tasted last night, Chen Yun quickly shook his head. Pure natural ingredients are indeed good, but the taste without any seasoning is still unacceptable to him. That's a shame. Odin shook his head and gave a sigh of regret, then led the way ahead, and the two soon came to a place similar to an altar. When the two arrived, Frigga and Thor had already been waiting for a long time. My brother, you. Seeing Chen Yun, Thor hesitated to speak, but was interrupted by Frigg, who appeared in time. Pulling Later's arm, Frigga's eyes were full of warning. Facing the huge threat from his mother, Thor resolutely hesitated, shrugged at Chen Yun, and closed his mouth with a strange expression. Leading Chen Yun to the top of the altar, Odin explained, I will release my divine power to open the passage later. After the hole appears, you can't hesitate, you must go in quickly. Seeing Chen Yun nodding, Odin looked at Frigg again. Ready. Frigga also nodded, and then pressed her hand on the base of the altar, and a magical aura immediately filled the entire altar. As the altar changed, Odin's body also emerged with a golden light running divine power. When the divine power reached its peak, an ominous crack suddenly appeared in the sky above the altar. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Yun teleported directly into the space crack. Looking at Chen Yun's back, Odin resisted the pressure and waved goodbye. When the divine power began to recover, the space crack quietly disappeared from sight. Look, I'm really old. Sensing the huge energy lost in his body, Odin sighed. Just entered hell. The dark and gloomy environment inside made Chen Yun have to open Sharingan. Chen Yun was finally able to observe the environment of hell through the eyesight dyed blood red by Sharingan. It was different from the hell that Chen Yun had imagined. There was almost nothing here except some cotton-like things floating in the air. Except for the darkness, there is only emptiness here. No, there are creatures here. Feeling vaguely that there were more than a dozen pairs of eyes staring at him, Chen Yun frowned. With a kick of his legs, Chen Yun quickly jumped into the air. Using Rashomon to summon a door as a fulcrum, he stayed in the air, looking down from the sky, as far as the eye can see. Apart from the darkness, the only thing Chen Yun could recognize were those unknown substances floating in the air. After waiting for a while, several dark figures with irregular square bodies and heads appeared at the position where Chen Yun was standing just now. Judging from the aura similar to hell, these strange things should be the residents of hell. But it seems that the IQ of these creatures does not seem to be high. After searching for a long time following Chen Yun's aura, the monsters scattered without finding anything. But then, just as Chen Yun let out a sigh of relief, these black shadow monsters flickered away through the space ability. The space nodes on their bodies are very bright. Through Sharingan, Chen Yun discovered this in surprise. But now that these monsters are gone, at least he is safe for now. After landing on the ground again, Chen Yun began to look for the space node that Odin said could lead to the Earth. After searching for a while, Chen Yun realized that something was wrong with the cold aura in the hell air. Even Wugu immortal physique can feel this chill. After searching around, Chen Yun, who found nothing yet, lit a fire and rested on the spot. But what he didn't realize was the pair of eyes staring at him in the darkness. Although the hell is dead and silent, it is not as dire and hot as Chen Yun imagined. In addition to the lack of light, the living environment that the outside world should have is also readily available here. But the only flaw is that there is no reference to represent time. Sitting by the fire, Chen Yun took out his mobile phone from the Shenwei space. Has it only been 2 hours? Looking at the time, Chen Yun fell silent. In this silent world, there is no scenery, no entertainment, and time seems to be extremely slow. Sitting cross-legged, Chen Yun fully opened up his spatial perception, ready to continue searching for possible spatial nodes. But when the perception began to spread, he immediately noticed the person hidden in the shadows. Who? Chen Yun yelled loudly, and his body quickly prepared to fight back at any time, and the Sharingan in his eyes was also running crazily. You were also exiled here by Odin. From the shadows in the corner, a beautiful woman stepped out. Under the light of the bonfire, the woman's figure looked extremely hot. Her long black hair hangs over her shoulders, and her face is as white as jade. She has a pair of charming and bewitching eyes, and her lips are as red as blood. It's just that such an extremely flirtatious woman carries an aura of death that doesn't match her. What did you do? With mockery in her tone, the woman raised her eyebrows and asked, did you destroy a few planets? Or did you slaughter half of the universe? To speak is to destroy the planet, and the woman's tone directly made Chen Yun frown. He didn't expect to meet another human being in hell. After looking at the woman, Chen Yun pondered, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm here because I want to go back to Earth. Ah. The beautiful eyes swept over the Asgardian costume Chen Yun was wearing, and the woman sneered, you were deceived by Odin. If you can get where you want to go through hell. Glancing at Chen Yun who didn't know why, the woman continued to explain, with this kind of strength, if you want to find a way to travel through the universe, you can find countless ways. After finishing speaking, the woman waved her hand, and the cotton-like plankton around her suddenly burst into light, embellishing the surroundings like day. At this moment, Chen Yun, who didn't want to pay attention to the woman, the god-level sensor in his body was frantically warning him, as if telling him that this woman was extremely dangerous and also very powerful. Wow, I didn't expect you to be so handsome. When the darkness was lit by plankton, Chen Yun's handsome face was also revealed in front of the woman's eyes. Thanks. For the powerful and unfamiliar woman, Chen Yun was extremely vigilant, if there is nothing else, I will take a rest. Unlike women who need to light up the space to see things, Chen Yun has already known the identity of the woman through Sharingan, which can see through the dark. Goddess of Death, Hela. Also Lord of the Gods, daughter of Odin. As the eldest daughter of Odin, Hela once followed Odin to conquer the 9 realms and made great achievements in battle. Not only became the executioner of Asgard, but also the previous owner of Thor's hammer. Such a powerful woman has been banned for thousands of years. Chen Yun closed his eyes and made up his mind not to provoke Hela. Hearing that Chen Yun wanted to rest, Hela just nodded, but she had no intention of leaving at all. Instead, she looked up and down Chen Yun with great interest. During the 1,000 years of fighting in the 9 realms, she has met countless men of all kinds. But Chen Yun was the most handsome person she had ever seen in thousands of years. Boy, this is my place. Imprisoned in hell for thousands of years, Hela has long since lost most of her interest in conquering the universe. After seeing the handsome and tall Chen Yun, Hela suddenly became interested in the thing between men and women that she had never done before in her life. You broke into my territory. Licking her lips, Hela smiled charmingly. According to the rules of hell, you will die in my hands. Or, kneel down and lick my toes and beg me to spare your life. Is this a strange hobby that has been awakened after being imprisoned for thousands of years? Hearing Hela's words, Chen Yun was dumbfounded. This was the first time he had seen such an arrogant woman. Looking playfully at Hela's round legs, Chen Yun warned, if you don't want to get pregnant, then disappear from my eyes. Pregnant. Excitedly, she hooked Chen Yun with her index finger, and Hela smiled softly, boy, you can try it. I want more and more to imprison you in hell and make you my prison. Looking at Hela, whose thoughts became more and more crazy, Chen Yun was already too lazy to talk nonsense. With a flash of light in his eyes, Hela's stomach was hit by a golden light. Just like what Chen Yun thought, Hela also couldn't resist the attack of the strong identification technique. What did you do to me? Looking at her bulging stomach in horror, Hela asked angrily, what's wrong with my stomach? 10 seconds later, Hela, who was still angry, gradually became stiff. A huge pain swept from her abdomen to her whole body. Hela, who collapsed on the ground, was experiencing the pain of childbirth in pain. With her tenacity, she could barely restrain her pain, and tried her best not to let out a scream. With her hands on the ground, Hela gritted her teeth and stared at Chen Yun, wishing she could strangle him to death right now. Looking at Hela, who was in pain and sweating, Chen Yun smiled. Just like what Hela said just now, he took off his shoes with a smirk, and put his feet in front of Hela's eyes. Is that what you said just now? Asshole. Exhausting all her strength, Hela cursed Chen Yun. But after that, she was so ashamed that she didn't want to say any more. Now Hela is worried about whether she will really give birth to a child. What's going on? Is this real or magic? With divine power in her hands, Hela panicked and wanted to knock out the imaginary child directly. But to her inexplicable horror, according to the information detected by divine power, there was not even the slightest discomfort in her body. Looking at Hela, who was desperately slapping her belly, Chen Yun lost interest in continuing to tease. Withdrawing his feet, Chen Yun returned to the side of the fire. Ignoring Hela, who fell to the ground and writhing in pain, he continued to use his space perception to find the space node that could return to Earth. Time flies. Half an hour later, Hela, whose whole body was already drenched in sweat, finally felt lighter, and her stomach gradually returned to flatness. After standing up in fear, Hela wiped the sweat from her forehead, looked at Chen Yun with complicated eyes, and was very entangled in her heart. There are both Chen Yun's painful complaints and the surprise of discovering Chen Yun's powerful magical ability. Looking at Hela, whose face was cloudy and uncertain, who was staring at him, Chen Yun suddenly felt a desire to play a prank. A smirk appeared on the corner of his mouth. Chen Yun looked at Hela with piercing eyes and teased, do you want to do it again? You will pay the price you deserve. Recalling the frightening experience just now, Hela's face suddenly turned extremely pale. She stared at Chen Yun viciously, and said cruelly, soon, I will let you understand the horror of hell. After all, Hela retreated into the shadows in embarrassment. And with Hela's departure, the plankton that were still blooming brightly also went out one after another. The entire space returned to darkness again. Looking at the back of Hela leaving, Chen Yun shrugged his shoulders and ignored this imprisoned crazy woman. After sensing one after another for an afternoon, Chen Yun checked out more than 700 space nodes in total. These nodes, except for a node connected to Asgard's domain. The remaining nodes all point to another place, the land of nothingness. For this result, Chen Yun was neither sad nor happy. He already knew the characteristics of hell from Odin. Just give him more time, Chen Yun will definitely find the way back to Earth. When he realized that all the space nodes in his location had been found, Chen Yun got up and changed a new area. After lighting a new fire, Chen Yun still sat cross-legged, ready to continue to use spatial perception to find the remaining spatial nodes. But as soon as he closed his eyes, Chen Yun sensed a large number of space elements converging towards him. Opening his eyes, Chen Yun frowned at the scene in front of him. At no time, a group of innumerable hell creatures had already surrounded him. Like the creatures encountered when they first arrived in hell, these creatures all have strong spatial elements. Moreover, Chen Yun vaguely came to a conclusion that the space ability on his body has a fatal attraction for these creatures. There are so many Endermen, what should you do? Hiding secretly in the darkness, a trace of madness flashed across Hela's face. The punch of the Enderman is enough to tear apart the space. As she spoke, Hela's voice gradually became louder, and she shouted loudly to Chen Yun, "If you don't want to lose your life, just kneel down and beg me." Realizing that the appearance of these Ender creatures has nothing to do with Hela, Chen Yun immediately replied, "Guys who hide their heads and show their tails are not qualified to point fingers. If you have the ability, come out and fight me head-on." After finishing speaking, the angry Chen Yun jumped up, and his body suddenly rose into the air. "If you have the ability, don't hide in the sky." Hela, who didn't want to experience the pain of childbirth again, didn't answer the call at all. She reminded with a smirk, "Sometimes, the sky is more dangerous than the ground." As soon as Hela finished speaking, Chen Yun felt his scalp go numb. Under the warning of the god-level sensory madness, Chen Yun discovered a large space element that was flying towards him. When these spatial elements arrived within the sight of Sharingan, Chen Yun was horrified to find that the opposite was actually a flying dragon made of black squares. Although huge in size, the Ender Dragon was extremely fast, rushing to Chen Yun in the blink of an eye. While trying to attack Chen Yun with its wings, a spark appeared in the stern mouth of the Ender Dragon. A huge and fiery flame burst out from the dragon's mouth in an instant. The fiery flames rose against the wind, and turned into a 10-meter-long red fire dragon in the blink of an eye. Passing through the phantom of Chen Yun who was dodging with a flash, the flames sprayed directly to the ground. The body of the Enderman on the ground who had no time to react was instantly ignited, and then turned into a pool of ashes amidst the screams. The Ender Dragon's reaction speed was also fast. When he realized that Chen Yun was not in front of him, he quickly turned around and found Chen Yun's position. Facing the endless attacks of the Ender Dragon and the continuous spray of flames, Chen Yun had long been dodging, extremely irritable. "If you beg me on your knees." Seeing Chen Yun's embarrassed appearance, Hela smiled triumphantly, "I will consider letting you go." "Ah." Glancing at the direction in which Hela spoke, Chen Yun sneered. Susanoo. Chen Yun, who no longer evaded, directly summoned the Golden Skull. With its huge body, combined with the upper bone armor, the aura of the Golden Skull far exceeds that of the Ender Dragon. In contrast, the Ender Dragon is simply a toy. How many cards does he have? Looking at the majestic Golden Skull, Hela's eyes fluttered, and her interest in Chen Yun became more and more intense. Die! Accompanied by Chen Yun's violent shouting, the giant sword in the Golden Skull's hand swung violently, and slashed straight at the Ender Dragon. Boom! A huge roar was produced the moment the Ender Dragon collided with the giant sword. The terrifying impact swept across all directions with the flames in the mouth of the Ender Dragon, and even kicked up a cloud of dust on the ground. The smoke and dust dissipated, and the golden skeleton stood motionless, while at its feet lay the Ender Dragon, whose corpse had already been separated. Standing where he was, Chen Yun looked up solemnly at the sky. There, large areas of space elements are still constantly gathering. In the sight of Sharingan, Chen Yun could clearly see the Ender Dragons gathering one after another. Exactly, there is still a lack of ingredients for dinner. After muttering something, the Sharingan in Chen Yun's eyes spun rapidly. Clenching the giant sword in his hand, the Golden Skull rushed straight towards the sky. It's so easy to kill the Ender Dragon. Looking at the picture of the Golden Skull killing all directions, Hela muttered dissatisfiedly, "I still want him to beg for mercy." But when Hela's eyes shifted to Chen Yun's heroic posture in battle, Her eyes, who had always admired war, began to blur again. This little guy is really fascinating. The attack is unparalleled, and the defense is strong. Golden Skull. Breaking into the middle of the Ender Dragon and the Enderman is like killing a tiger into a flock of sheep. For a moment, the entire battlefield was filled with broken limbs and broken arms, as well as the painful wailing of Ender creatures. Facing such a powerful enemy, all the Ender creatures were scared to death, and hesitated to step forward in front of the Golden Skull. After a few seconds of stalemate, the Ender creatures who knew that Chen Yun was not easy to mess with left silently. After the Ender creature disappeared without a trace, Chen Yun, who was standing in the center of the battlefield, looked around, ready to look for Hela. But after searching for a long time, Chen Yun couldn't find Hela's whereabouts. Putting away the Golden Skull, Chen Yun fell to the ground again. This flesh. Taking a look at the Ender Dragon's meat, Chen Yun nodded in satisfaction, and had already ordered the ingredients for dinner in his heart. As for finding space nodes, it was actually not that important in Chen Yun's mind. If it doesn't work, he can also turn on the aura of luck to find nodes. Of course, the aura of luck that can trigger unknown disasters is only a last resort. Reigniting the long-extinguished fire, Chen Yun roasted the Ender Dragon meat. Skilled barbecue skills, coupled with various seasonings in Shenwei space. Soon, delicious grilled Ender Dragon meat appeared in hell for the first time. It smells so good. In the darkness in the distance, smelling the tempting fragrance floating from Hela, who is not good at cooking, only felt that her saliva was about to flow down. Although it is a hell creature, the barbecue made with Ender Dragon meat is delicious beyond Chen Yun's expectations. Not only is the meat very tender, but it also tastes great. Perhaps because it is rich in space elements and makes the meat more pure, the meat of the Ender Dragon doesn't even have a slight meaty smell. Comfortable. After wolfing down a whole piece of meat, Chen Yun burped in satisfaction. Just as he was about to put the rest of the barbecue into the Shenwei space, Hela suddenly appeared from the darkness. There was no trace of impoliteness on her face. Hela sat down next to Chen Yun with a natural expression, stretched out her hand, tore off a piece of meat from the barbecue and started to eat it. Good to eat. Hela, who hadn't eaten delicious food for thousands of years, was immediately conquered by the fragrant barbecue. Looking at her expression of enjoyment, Chen Yun couldn't help but tease. The skin is really thick. Seeing that Hela was indifferent and didn't look ashamed at all, Chen Yun smiled angrily. How dare you come out? Have you forgotten what happened just now? Little guy, do you have the heart to attack a weak woman? Greedily chomping on the meat, Hela retorted confidently, if you have the ability, come here. Weak woman. Hearing Hela's words, Chen Yun was speechless. Fighting in the 9 realms for thousands of years, killing countless people with his own hands, he was once the executioner of Asgard and the owner of Thor's hammer. Such a woman has the face to call herself a weak woman. What, you don't believe it? Glancing at the strange expression on Chen Yun's face, Hela slowly licked the grease stains on the corner of her mouth, and said with a charming smile, we don't seem to have much enmity, do we? These foods are also brought by me through untold hardships. How dare you say it? Chen Yun snorted coldly, pointed at the stumped limbs and arms of hell creatures around him and said, if you were an ordinary person, you would have killed him a long time ago. Ha ha. Hela smiled coquettishly, and praised without any shame, but you are very strong. In hell, there is only darkness and silence. Eye waves turned on Chen Yun. Hela narrowed her eyes slightly, and continued to say in a seductive voice, why don't we get along well, how is life here? Get along with a playful smile, Chen Yun shrugged and said, for example, lick my feet. You. Hela immediately stopped chewing, and her beautiful eyes glared at Chen Yun viciously. How dare this little fool tease her? Ha ha. Looking at Hela's devastated state, Chen Yun finally avenged what he had just done, feeling very happy. Seeing the bright smile on Chen Yun's face, Hela gritted her teeth with hatred. Just as she was about to fight back, she saw a golden light flashing in Chen Yun's eyes. Thinking of Chen Yun's strange ability, she who was about to get angry had no choice but to hold back her anger. What happened just now was simply the greatest shame in her life. The pain of childbirth still lingers in her mind. It won't be long before acid rain falls here. Sighing faintly, Hela ate the barbecue and said slowly, acid rain is very corrosive, and everything will be corroded by it. Looking at the expressionless Chen Yun, Hila suddenly smiled charmingly. If your attitude can be better, I will tell you where to hide from the rain. Better. Chen Yun rolled his eyes, and directly slapped Hila's hand towards the barbecue. Is this kind of attitude okay? Smiling and throwing the barbecue into the Shenwei space, Chen Yun glanced at Hila disdainfully. Stingy man. Seeing the delicious barbecue disappear, Hila couldn't help complaining. But soon, a charming smile appeared on her face again. But the more you do this, the more I like you. Seeing Hila's charming smile made Chen Yun's heart shudder. He intended to tease a few more words, but Hila's smiling face still made Chen Yun hold back what he wanted to say. After a while of silence, the sky really started to rain sparsely as Hila said. In the beginning, it didn't rain very much. But soon, Chen Yun discovered something was wrong. When the raindrops fell on the clothes, white smoke rose from the clothes. It really is acid rain. Looking at Hila, who used his divine power to cover the two of them, Chen Yun stopped thinking of hiding from the rain, and quietly observed the hell rain. In a blink of an eye, the raindrops gradually became denser. The remains of the surrounding ender creatures were gradually corroded into a dense white mist. When the white mist disappeared, the corpses on the ground were only pale skeletons. Little guy, I can't hold it anymore. Looking up at the more and more rain clouds gathering above her head, Hila's voice sounded a little helpless. If we don't leave, we will become like that. Come with me quickly. Chen Yun raised his eyebrows, looked at the corroded ground around him, and chose not to pay attention to Hila. Rosheng arbitrary door. Taking a deep breath, Chen Yun instantly summoned a 100-story glass door above his head. As soon as the glass door with a thickness of several meters appeared, it directly blocked the falling acid rain. Little guy, you have so many tricks. Meiyan stared at the glass door above her head, and Hila sneered, this product of creation magic has nothing to do with acid rain. Pointing to the potholes on the door corroded by acid rain, Hila smiled and explained, except for some special rocks in hell, nothing can stop the corrosion of acid rain. Is it? Looking up at the glass door that had been corroded to only a dozen layers, Chen Yun folded his hands behind his back, ignoring the noisy Hila. The Sengoyu Sharingan, which has been spinning in the eyes, turned into a kaleidoscope Sharingan in an instant. Amaterasu. Following Chen Yun's loud shout, a black flame appeared in the sky out of thin air. Seeing this flame in the acid rain for the first time, Hila just had the idea of ridiculing, and then cautiously discovered the huge danger hidden in it. She closed her mouth silently watching the falling acid rain touch the flame. What is this? What shocked Hila was that the flames that should have been extinguished became more fierce under the erosion of acid rain. Under Hela's surprised gaze, something happened that overturned her imagination. The highly corrosive acid rain fell into the black flames of Amaterasu. It was as if oil had been poured into a fire. The originally mild flames rose into the sky in an instant, and even began to actively look for the existence of acid rain. Staring blankly at the sky, Hila quietly withdrew the divine power used to block the acid rain. With a smile on her face, she ran into the area shrouded in black flames. Leaning close to Chen Yun, Hila smiled charmingly and said, "You have given me more and more surprises. Little guy, I seem to really like you. I didn't invite you in," Chen Yun said with a dark face as Hila approached with sideways eyes. To this thick-skinned goddess of death, he was completely speechless. Hela's arrogant personality is exactly the same as her appearance. It is filled with a strong air of death, but it is noble and glamorous, like those few high-level birds living at the top of the world. Little guy, you didn't refuse, did you? Hila leaned towards Chen Yun's side with a smile like a flower, with a flattering expression on her face. Is this still the goddess of death who tore Thor, the hard steel flame giant? Looking at Hela's originally glamorous and pretty face, now full of coquettishness, Chen Yun felt his scalp go numb, and the corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. Shaking his head, Chen Yun no longer cared about her. Sitting cross-legged, he continued to search for the space node back to Earth. If it's so easy to find weak space nodes. Looking at Chen Yun's serious look with her chin held, Hila couldn't help reminding, I've left this place long ago. Shut up. Chen Yun rolled his eyes, too lazy to talk nonsense to her. Seeing Chen Yun's reaction, Hila curled her lips, and just sat quietly beside Chen Yun, not to annoy him anymore. This little boy is different from other men. Looking at Chen Yun's profile, a thought flashed in Hela's mind. As the most powerful woman in Asgard, Hela naturally has countless suitors. What's more, her gorgeous beauty and figure surpass the universe, which makes her look above the top. Anyone who approached Hela, or even tried to strike up a conversation, was basically beaten away by her. But now, meeting a man like Chen Yun who can't be beaten and has a different personality, naturally aroused a strong interest in Hela's heart. After the acid rain subsided, the bored Hela rolled her eyes and suddenly laughed. Standing up, Hela's figure disappeared into the darkness. What's burning? After a while, Chen Yun, who was concentrating on searching for space nodes, was awakened by a burning smell. Looking at the source of the smell, Hela was messing with something at the campfire nearby. After getting closer, he found that Hela was trying hard to roast the thigh of an ender dragon. This ender dragon leg, which I don't know where it came from, has been destroyed and almost turned into a piece of coke. To thank you for the barbecue that I had before. Seeing Chen Yun approaching, the corners of Hela's mouth rose, and she patted the dark barbecue with a smile. I specially roasted it to pay you back. You snatched it yourself. Speechlessly looking at the charred barbecue, Chen Yun had mixed feelings. Also, are you sure it wasn't used to poison me? How is this possible? Hela frowned, stared at Chen Yun and said, I used to do this all the time. Looking at the goddess of death in the dark cooking world speechlessly, Chen Yun felt that he had nothing to say. Let's keep the meat for yourself. Pointing to a direction in midair, Chen Yun smiled and said, I have found the space node of the sun. Snack, you should be able to eat it on Earth. Little boy, stop dreaming. The confident Chen Yun immediately caused Hela to laugh. Finding the coordinates of a certain planet among so many space nodes is simply looking for a needle in a haystack. How about we do something interesting? Hela licked her lips charmingly. Is it used to pass the time and relieve loneliness? If you can't help it. Glancing at Hela with ruddy cheeks, Chen Yun rolled his eyes. You can do it yourself, and you will have enough food and clothing. Little guy, how dare you tease me? Hela's voice suddenly turned into anger and threw the barbecue in her hand, and immediately, her pretty face was full of gloom. If you dare not, then fight with me. As a defeated opponent, why should I fight you again? Looking at Hela, Chen Yun curled his lips in disdain. With a stare, a strong identification technique was shot at the unprepared Hela. You fool! Caught off guard, Hela's stomach swelled rapidly before she could react. Staring in horror at her pregnant belly, Hela collapsed to the ground in pain. Not even a strong man, yet dared to challenge me. With a cold snort, Chen Yun turned a deaf ear to Hela's screams, and continued to sit cross-legged, looking for the unknown space node. But what Chen Yun didn't expect was that just after the half-hour time limit for the identification of the strong past, Hela entangled him again. When I say fight, you can only fight with your body. With her arms around her chest, Hela said arrogantly, if I win, you will be my servant from now on. If you win, Hela's eyes fluttered, and she glanced at Chen Yun charmingly, then I'll be your maid. You said a fight, is it a serious fight? Looking at Hela's face full of spring, Chen Yun really felt dumbfounded. He didn't even know why this goddess of death changed so much. Not interested in. Looking at Hela up and down, Chen Yun pouted, I'm not interested in older maids. You. Hela still wanted to speak, but was hit in the abdomen by another golden light shot by Chen Yun. Little guy. The familiar pain swept through Hela's whole body again. With only time to curse, she skillfully curled up on the ground clutching her swollen stomach. You're just doing useless work. Probably because she got caught too many times. This time, Hela was surprised to find that she could endure the pain of childbirth a little bit. Looking at Chen Yun who was looking for space nodes with his eyes closed, she couldn't help laughing. Looking for nodes is just useless. I found it. Just when Hela was about to continue speaking, Chen Yun suddenly stood up with a happy face. Focusing on a certain point in space, he stretched out his left arm forward. At this weak space node, Chen Yun easily tore apart the void, and a black hole suddenly appeared in front of him. On the other side of the black hole, there are tall buildings and busy traffic that Chen Yun is familiar with. Goodbye, incompetent maid. Smiling and waving goodbye to Hela, Chen Yun jumped into the black hole, and the black hole closed instantly after Chen Yun left. You actually abandoned me. Hela, who couldn't believe it, roared loudly despite the pain of childbirth. But before she finished speaking, she was surprised to see a reappearing black hole. The black hole opened again, and Chen Yun's head was exposed. It must be boring to stay in this kind of place for thousands of years. Smiling, Chen Yun threw a high-tech mobile phone to Hila. In order to relieve some pain, you can play the standalone game above. Before the words finished, Chen Yun's figure disappeared again. Take me out with you. Hila, who had been in a daze, suddenly yelled loudly at the black hole that was slowly disappearing in front of her. Unfortunately, she did not wait for any response. All that was left for her was the cell phone lying quietly on the ground. Still only the darkness and loneliness of hell. The mobile phone was left behind just to annoy Hala, an arrogant woman. Ignoring Hela's yelling behind him, Chen Yun walked quickly in the black hole. And the black hole that appeared above the streets of New York immediately attracted the attention of passers-by. God, look at the sky, what is that? My God, is this a black hole? Oh my God, it's impossible, it's too scary, could it be an alien attack? When Chen Yun walked out of the black hole, the place below was already crowded with dark crowds. Hi. After waving his hand at the mobile phone camera of the crowd, Chen Yun disappeared from the spot in an instant. Through Shenwei's teleportation ability, Chen Yunxian returned to his manor. Why is there no one? After searching around, Chen Yun didn't find anyone. Teleporting to Tony's villa again, Chen Yunkai learned from Jarvis, the smart butler, that Zhao Shiren and Pepper met for shopping. I've been missing for so long, and no one is worried about me. Sighing, Chen Yun rolled his eyes. But soon, he came back to his senses. Although the process was very exciting, but counting the time, I seem to have disappeared for a day. After thinking about it, Chen Yun shook his head and smiled. When he came to the basement, Chen Yun saw Tony, who was playing with the Batman armor. Wow, our superhero is back. Tony dropped the equipment in his hands, and gave Chen Yun a warm hug. What does the kingdom of the gods look like? Reaching out and patting Chen Yun's shoulder a few times, Tony winked and asked, are there many beauties from other places? That's what you want to ask, right? Speechlessly slapping Tony's hand away, Chen Yun shrugged, it's not bad, but the scenery is quite nice. Hey, boy, Tony looked at Chen Yun depressedly, showing an expression of hatred for iron and steel. What is the scenery? If it were me, I would definitely spend the spring evening with two beauties from the Protoss. Looking at the dreamy Tony, Chen Yun rolled his eyes. He really wants to tell Tony that the beauties in Asgard are like tearing tigers with their hands and dismantling tanks with their bare hands. But in the end, Chen Yun still held back. If you let Pepper know what you think, you'll probably. Pointing to Jarvis's core, Chen Yun reached out and made a gesture of wiping his neck. Alright, you win. Hearing Pepper's name, Tony immediately raised his hands in surrender, and then immediately ordered, hey. Jarvis, delete the recording just now. Even for peace of mind, he personally walked to the core of Jarvis and carefully checked whether there was a backup of the recording. Have you confirmed your relationship with Pepper? Seeing Tony being so careful, Chen Yun asked with a smile. Tony's face darkened, and he said embarrassedly, so, but I believe that she will accept me sooner or later. This is not a playboy style. Chen Yun joked with a smile, I remember you once said that you would not give up a forest for a tree. That's just a young thought. Shrugging, Tony took a fresh cup of coffee from the coffee machine. Now that I think about it, sometimes it's nice to hang from a tree. Looking at Tony, who was drinking coffee as water in front of him, Chen Yun frowned and advised, you should pay attention to rest, or you will not be able to survive sooner or later. I can feel it. Shaking his head, Tony retorted, my brain is not allowed to rest, it's always thinking. Okay, I admit defeat. Sighing, Chen Yun decided not to continue arguing. Summoning the Divine Might Space, Chen Yun took out the destroyer armor he had obtained earlier. Although it has been dilapidated, the delicate armor still exudes a suffocating cold metal light. Wow, this is a big baby. Touching the shell of the destroyer with bright eyes, Tony's face was full of excitement. Is this for me? Well, just for your research. Cool, I will work overtime to figure out its structure. Looking at Tony's surprised expression, Chen Yun shook his head. Take it out so early, will it lead to the sudden death of this scientific research madman? Chen Yun, who was a bit regretful, muttered to himself, and couldn't help reminding again, you should pay attention to rest. No problem. I promise I'll take a good rest. Tony fiddled with the destroyer fondly, and agreed perfunctorily. Chen Yun shook his head helplessly, turned around and walked out the door. All right then, I will leave this place to you. I'll go to S.H.I.E.L.D. again. Turning around and taking a new mobile phone from the cabinet, and then entering the Shinwei space, Chen Yun disappeared from the spot in an instant. This trick is really cool. Looking at the place where Chen Yun disappeared, Tony shook his head enviously. But when his eyes fell on the destroyer again, he immediately returned to his previous state, and his eyes became extremely bright. S.H.I.E.L.D. Headquarters. Looking at the documents on the desktop, Nick Fury kneaded his forehead irritably. Since Thor and the alien gods from Asgard appeared, there has been an upsurge of discussion within S.H.I.E.L.D. Facing this group of guys who claim to be gods and have amazing destructive power, they can't come up with any good solutions for the time being. I don't know how Chen is doing in Asgard. Thinking of Chen Yun who went to Asgard with Thor, Nick Fury couldn't help chuckling a few times. He is so bold that he dared to rip off the gods. Just thinking about it, a black vortex suddenly appeared in front of Nick Fury. Mazefakel. The vortex that appeared out of thin air startled Nick Fury, and he quickly took out a pistol from the drawer. Then, with his whole body tensed, he saw Chen Yun jumping out of the Shinwei space. Hey boy. Clutching his beating heart, Nick Fury complained, next time I come, I need to say hello in advance. I was almost scared to have a heart attack. Don't worry, you're fine. After finding a chair to sit down, Chen Yun responded casually. What happened after you were taken away by Thor? Seeing Chen Yun's relaxed expression, Nick Fury became furious. Because of this, the executives are going crazy. Are they real gods? They're just aliens. Chen Yun raised his eyebrows, and then explained, it's just that thousands of years ago, they visited the Earth and left some rumors about the gods. And don't worry. Glancing at Nick Fury with a worried face, Chen Yun smiled and said, I have become a hero in Asgard, and these gods are very friendly to us. When did you become a hero in Asgard? Subconsciously helped the blindfold on his face, Nick Fury stared at the Asgardian costume on Chen Yun and complained, is this also what you gained in Asgard? I just impregnated their enemies. Shrugging, Chen Yun said innocently. Pregnant. Nick Fury froze, touched his black head in doubt, and blurted out a sentence from his mouth. Mazefakel. Mazefakel, you actually left your precious seeds to aliens. Looking at Nick Fury, who had been associated with outer space, Chen Yun was speechless. Well, this is one of my abilities. Shaking his head dumbfounded, Chen Yun quickly explained, whether male or female, as long as I stare at him, he will become pregnant and give birth. Of course, this is just a feeling, and it will not actually give birth to a child. After speaking, Chen Yun looked at Nick Fury. Subconsciously avoiding Chen Yun's gaze, Nick Fury shouted in horror, hey! Don't look at me. Don't worry, I'm not such a boring person. Looking at the panicked Nick Fury, Chen Yun sighed. Shrinking his neck to avoid Chen Yun's gaze, Nick Fury said cowardly, I don't want to experience the feeling of a man being pregnant. Sometimes, it's good to experience the greatness of maternal love. It was the first time I saw the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. acting so cowardly, and Chen Yun couldn't help but want to tease, at least you are also the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you're still so old. Shut your mouth. Nick Fury cursed viciously, then shook his head desperately, in short, I will never experience such a bad thing. Okay then, let's continue the topic just now. Seeing Nick Fury's terrified look, Chen Yun shrugged and changed the topic, Asgards. About Asgard, Chen Yun reported one by one. Of course, the passage in which Chen Yun gained a lot in Odin's treasure house and the encounter with Hela in Hell were removed. So, you defeated 100,000 frost giants, so you became the hero who protects Asgard. After listening to Chen Yun's narration, Nick Fury was shocked. In just one day, Chen Yun actually did such a sensational thing. A person from Earth not only saved God's domain, but also became a hero of Asgard. This news is even more exaggerated than aliens invading the Earth. That's right. Nodding his head, Chen Yun admitted. This is really unbelievable. That's 100,000 frost giants. How did you do it? Nick Fury asked with a look of disbelief. It's very simple. Let them get pregnant. Mazefakel. Stop. Glancing at the frightened Nick Fury, Chen Yun asked speechlessly, are there any other tasks? No. Nick Fury, who remembered Chen Yun's strange power, waved his hands in horror and said, "You should go home and rest for the time being." Nodding his head, Chen Yun disappeared in place again. Unlike Nick Fury's order, Chen Yun did not go home immediately, but instead appeared in the shield vault. Looking at the cosmic Rubik's Cube placed in the very center, Chen Yun felt a little more worried. Cosmic Rubik's Cube. At the same time, it is also a famous space gem. In the universe, its existence is no longer a secret. Chen Yun sighed when he thought that the news had already been leaked and that he would be robbed by alien visitors in the near future. Forget it, the soldiers will come and cover the water and earth. Speaking of which, it's hard to say who will snatch who. Thinking of the various abilities on his body, Chen Yun let go of his worries. Shaking his head, his figure disappeared from S.H.I.E.L.D. When Chen Yun appeared again, he had arrived at the most prosperous supermarket in New York. "Mr. Batman, all your consumption will be paid by me." As soon as he arrived at the market, Chen Yun was recognized by the boss here. The happy boss was following closely behind Chen Yun and showing his hospitality. "Superheroes Batmans are shopping in my market, this is the best publicity." Thinking about it, the boss will not accept Chen Yun's money no matter what. How can you experience the happiness of rich people like this? Looking at the persistent boss, Chen Yun thought silently. After thinking about it, Chen Yun called Tony's loyal friend, Happy Hogan. When the white and fat Happy appeared, Chen Yun finally felt like a rich man. "I'll leave it to you here." Patting Happy on the shoulder, Chen Yun handed him over to pay the bill. Putting on the newly bought sunglasses, he walked down the street with a leisurely expression. In the past few days, except for the non-stop fighting, Chen Yun almost spent the rest of his time researching his abilities. This kind of leisure time made Chen Yun feel very comfortable. Shuttle in the streets of New York, he admired the unique scenery on both sides of the road. While walking, Chen Yun's gaze was attracted by the large screen broadcasting news by the side of the road. The latest defense fund of the E-series. Every fund you buy is a bullet for us to fight evil. Who's the superhero going door to door fighting for America? Hold high the flag of the beautiful country. Quote. Looking at Captain America's snarky advertisement, Chen Yun's face darkened instantly. What the hell? Thinking of how the American team had just been revived, and was dragged by fanatical advertisers to shoot this kind of commercial, Chen Yun felt a chill rushing all over his body. "I didn't expect that, Captain America. With big eyebrows and big eyes, you can actually shoot such an advertisement." After teasing a few words, Chen Yun continued walking on the road. Before he knew it, he walked to the desolate area where he had just been attacked by the lizardmen. Looking at the Queen's district still surrounded by the cordon, Chen Yun sighed. A group of small lizardmen can cause such a big loss. That's it, there are still superheroes shots. If it is not stopped, the entire Earth may encounter crisis. Shaking his head, Chen Yun was about to leave Queens, but when he was about to leave, he suddenly sensed the presence of someone. At this time, there are still people here. Frowning, Chen Yun crossed the cordon and went straight into Queens. After walking a few steps on the devastated road, Chen Yun found himself surrounded by a group of teenagers and girls. In the middle of this group of young people, two girls caught Chen Yun's attention. One is a 4 or 5-year-old blonde girl, and the other is a girl with green hair, with the appearance of a vice eldest sister on her face. "You crossed the line, this is a restricted area." Seeing Chen Yun who broke into here, the green-haired girl warned with a cold face. "Shouldn't you be a staff member?" Looking up and down at the girl in ordinary clothes, Chen Yun said with a smile, "They should have told me these words. We are orphans, and many materials discarded here can meet our needs." Facing Chen Yun, the girl unconsciously let go of her affairs. "This is our paradise. Aren't you afraid of infection?" Pointing to the green blood that had dried up on the ground, Chen Yun frowned and asked, "I just encountered a lizard man here. We fear death more than infection." Looking directly into Chen Yun's eyes behind the sunglasses, the girl smiled bitterly and said, "You should go, stranger." Looking at the group of orphans haunting the restricted area, Chen Yun shook his head and prepared to leave. Before leaving, Chen Yun asked with a smile, "By the way, what's your name?" After a moment of hesitation, the girl finally said a name. "Polaris." Polaris. Hearing this name, Chen Yun was surprised. Wearing sunglasses, he looked up and down at the young lady in front of him. Only then did he discover that Polaris turned out to be a very distinctive beauty. Although slightly thin, but the figure is slightly good. Especially the legs, which are thin and long, and the lines are also very beautiful. The sharp and pretty face made her delicate facial features more eye-catching, and with that green hair, she looked aggressive. After being stunned for a moment, Chen Yun understood the name of Polaris. In the beautiful country, many orphans do not have a surname, and even Chen Yun's own name was chosen by him. Sensing the faint electromagnetic fluctuations on Polaris, Chen Yun felt a little enlightenment in his heart. This Polaris is probably the missing daughter of the electromagnetic king. But what is different from Magneto is that although he is full of aggressiveness and his voice is cold, Polaris has a very kind heart, otherwise he would not be the protector of these orphans. Thinking of the residents who were rescued from the lizard men before, there seems to be a person with green hair. Chen Yun asked with a smile, "Were you a resident of Queens before?" "Yes," Polaris nodded. In the past, Polaris would never say so much to a stranger. However, Chen Yun's faint sense of intimacy still made Polaris unable to restrain himself. She said with a lonely expression, "I have been staying here, looking for my brother and sister. I don't know if they are missing or dead." After finishing speaking, Polaris shook his head involuntarily, as if trying to forget some bad things. Do they have any characteristics? Although he had already made some guesses, Chen Yun still frowned and asked, "I often hang out in Queens, maybe I have an impression." "Their names are Pietro and Wanda." Sure enough, Polaris said two names Chen Yun was familiar with. "Their hair is similar to mine, except that one has red hair and the other has silver hair. Wanda and Quicksilver." After listening to Polaris' words, two names immediately appeared in Chen Yun's mind. Such a conspicuous appearance, but he did not remember it among the residents rescued in Queens before. From this point of view, these two people should no longer be in Queens. After thinking about it carefully, Chen Yun decided to stay and observe this girl who exudes electromagnetic energy all over her body. Taking out a pocket camera from his pocket, Chen Yun pointed to himself, "I am also an orphan. The name is Chen Yun." Sighing, Chen Yun looked at the dilapidated appearance of Queens. "Now, I am an intern reporter, specializing in post-disaster research." Turning his gaze to Polaris' pretty face, Chen Yun asked with a smile, "Can you show me around here, please?" Polaris hesitated for a moment, because Chen Yun's clothes really didn't look like a reporter. The t-shirt and jeans on his body made Chen Yun look more like an ordinary tourist. "You should be able to tell that I am Chinese." Seeing Polaris' hesitation, Chen Yun explained with a smile, "I bought this dress from Chinatown." Chen Yun's words easily convinced Polaris. She just wanted to make a move, but she glanced at the children behind her, and her face hesitated again. "If this report makes it to the newspaper." Lifting the camera in his hand, Chen Yun said with a smile, "Maybe, there will be kind people who can adopt them." After listening to Chen Yun's words, Polaris thought for a while before nodding. After giving some instructions to the children behind him, Polaris walked up to Chen Yun, "Let's go, I'll take you to our accommodation." Following Polaris, the two came to a small supermarket. The valuables in the supermarket had already been swept away when the lizard men attacked. What was left in the supermarket were common foods such as bread and ham sausage, and there were a lot of mineral water and drinks beside them. Although it is a little less, it is more than enough to meet the daily food and lodging of a dozen children. Apart from the fact that the water is polluted and becomes extremely precious, there is actually no need to worry about starvation here. Pointing to the mineral water piled up in the corner, Polaris shrugged, "It would be better without those robbers." With that said, Polaris took a bottle of water from the shelf and handed it to Chen Yun. "What's the matter with the robber?" After taking a sip of water, Chen Yun frowned and asked, "There are still gangsters here." Although they were attacked by lizardmen, the gangsters did not all evacuate. Sighing, Polaris explained, "There are still some gangsters and gangsters who were not well known before. They've formed a new gang to blackmail those of us who don't have the means to get out of Queens." As soon as the words fell, Polaris smiled. She patted Chen Yun's shoulder and said aggressively, "Don't be afraid, I will cover you." "Thanks." Chen Yun, who was treated like a younger brother for the first time, smiled and nodded. After chatting with Polaris for a while, Chen Yun started asking about other children. Soon, He became acquainted with 17 children. For the children, Chen Yun is an enthusiastic little brother who is rare to meet, and Chen Yun's conversation is humorous and very likable. I want to take a picture. Shoot me first, shoot me first. When Chen Yun said that he wanted to take pictures, the children all rushed up and surrounded Chen Yun. Come one by one, I promise to take beautiful pictures of you. Taking pictures of the smiling faces of the children one by one with the camera, Chen Yun spent the whole afternoon happily and relaxed. When the afterglow of the setting sun spread over the entire city, Chen Yun and Polaris were already lying on the roof admiring the dilapidated city scenery around them. Why do you keep wearing sunglasses? After a moment of silence, Polaris asked curiously, the current light has. Because my eyes were hurt. Looking at Polaris with a cold face and a warm heart, Chen Yun lied decisively, I'm afraid it will scare you, so. Is it? Polaris blinked, and suddenly pointed to a certain direction in the sky and said, soon, the brightest star in the night sky will appear here. Polaris. Looking at the direction pointed by Polaris, Chen Yun replied with a smile, it is also the most beautiful at the same time. Chen Yun's words stunned Polaris. She didn't know if Chen Yun was talking about beauty, the stars, or herself. Shaking her head, Polaris didn't think much about it. She already had her own heart, and she didn't even bother to guess what others thought. Silently looking at the gradually dark night sky, Polaris murmured, I like the dark night. Looking at the confused Chen Yun, Polaris explained with a smile, the hero in my heart will appear in the dark. Dark night and Polaris, don't you think they match well? Night, hero. Hearing what Polaris said, Chen Yun was completely confused. Just as he was about to ask, there was a scream from downstairs. Hearing the screams, the two people on the roof immediately got up. After looking down, they found out. A group of vicious guys have appeared at the door of the supermarket. At the same time, they were holding a child in their hands. There were 30 to 50 people in this group of people who appeared at the entrance of the supermarket. Not only did he have tattoos all over his body, but he also had a stern expression on his face. Moreover, their faces were flushed and their breathing was heavy, apparently they had just finished drinking. The leader was a vicious black man. The blacks have dreadlocks and tattoos of wolf heads on their arms and necks. This kid stole something from our black wolf gang. Patting the boy who was being carried by his subordinates, and then glancing at the child hidden in the supermarket, the black man grinned grinningly and shouted, let the person in charge get out quickly. We need compensation. While the black man was talking, he greedily glanced at the supplies in the supermarket through the door. Although the valuables are no longer there, the various foods and plenty of bottled water inside still make black people greedy. Asshole. Looking at the desperately struggling boy, Polaris looked gloomy. With the help of the air conditioner on the balcony, Polaris quickly descended from the roof to the ground. Looking at the back of Polaris, Chen Yun raised his eyebrows, and followed him down the rooftop. As soon as it landed, Polaris warned the black man angrily, let him go. Hearing Polaris scolding, the black curled his lips in disdain. He glanced at Polaris sideways, but the black man opened his mouth in shock. Exquisite and beautiful appearance, cold and proud temperament, white and slender legs straight and slender. The black man's eyes instantly became extremely red. After staring at the graceful figure of Polaris for a long while, the black man swallowed sharply. Even the younger brothers behind the black man showed expressions of amazement and salivation. These gangsters from the Black Wolf gang are eagerly looking at Polaris. Judging from their greedy expressions, they can't wait to pounce on it immediately. I didn't steal anything. The weird atmosphere at the scene made the boy who had been held up in the air start to cry. He cried loudly, I didn't know it belonged to them. Say it again, let him go. Looking at the boy's terrified little face, Polaris clenched his fists angrily, and his tone became more and more cold. Ha ha, let him go. The triangular eyes stared straight at the North Star, and the black man laughed and said, for the sake of your beauty, I can let him go. However, as soon as the voice changed, the eyes of the black man gleamed with greed, and he stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. As a price, you have to have a cannon with me. Hearing the black man's words, the younger brothers behind him also whistled one after another, and some even followed suit. Boss, I want to play with her too. Such a beautiful woman should be shared together. Ha ha ha. Facing the foul language of the gangsters, Polaris snorted coldly. She squinted her beautiful eyes and scanned the gangsters around her. As soon as Polaris lifted his slender hand, the knives on the shelves of the supermarket and in the kitchen flew into the air. What? Seeing this sudden and strange scene, the gangsters backed away in panic. But these knives, as if controlled by the North Star, are aiming at their hearts from afar. Superpower. Alien. Seeing the scene in front of him, the black man was shocked. As a member of a big gangster before, black people know a lot of taboos that other gangsters don't know. And aliens are one of the most dangerous taboos. We have no malicious intentions. Looking at the knife flashing in the air, the black man decisively raised his hands and said in admiration, "As long as you put down the knife, we will leave immediately." Looking at the boy who was still in the gangster's hands, Polaris hesitated for a while, but finally chose to give up. Controlling to retract the knife, Polaris stared at the black man indifferently. "Go away. Get out. I regret it." Seeing that the danger had been lifted, the black man suddenly grinned, and quickly took out a pistol from his pocket. Holding the gun against the boy's head, he threatened Polaris sharply, "Surrender quickly. Otherwise, I'll kill him with one shot." Looking at the frightened and trembling child, Polaris' heart trembled. She intends to use the power again, but a line of blood has already flowed out from under her nose. Forcibly using an ability that is not yet proficient, she still paid the price. Haha, this chick can't do it. The bloodshed was also discovered by the black man, and he screamed excitedly, "Hurry up and grab this woman, and sell it when we get tired of it." The black brothers also reacted one after another, looking at Polaris with possessive and evil desires in their eyes. A foreigner can sell a lot, ah. While everyone was laughing wildly, the controlled boy overcame his fear and bit the gangster's arm that grabbed him. Taking advantage of the gangster letting go, the boy hurriedly ran in the direction of the North Star. Go to hell. Looking at the fleeing boy, the black man showed a hint of ferocity on his face, and he pulled the trigger on the boy's back without mercy. Pong sounded. The bullets fired straight at the boy, and the boy crouched down with his head covered in horror. But under everyone's gaze, the bullet did not hit the boy. Instead, it stopped not far from the muzzle of the gun, as if firmly grasped by an invisible hand, unable to move any further. Run. In the silence, Polaris' weak voice suddenly came out. At this time, her face became even paler, and her nosebleeds even trickled down. Polaris, who was kneeling on one knee, was struggling to raise his hand, trying his best to stop the bullet in the air. After the boy ran again, Polaris waved his little hand with difficulty. The bullet that stopped in midair suddenly moved. What? Accompanied by the black man's screams, the bullet returned the same way. But because the black man dodged ahead of time, the whistling bullets only scratched his arm. Catch her. Covering his bleeding arm, the black man shouted angrily, "I will make her life worse than death." Hearing the order, his younger brothers took out their weapons one after another and aimed at the Polaris, which was already exhausted. Take the children and leave. With the last ounce of strength, Polaris pushed the boy into Chen Yun's arms. Looking at Chen Yun behind him, Polaris shouted sharply, "Leave me alone, go." Looking coldly at the hooligans surrounding him, Chen Yun didn't intend to move at all. Why don't you leave? Picking up a piece of rotten wood on the ground, Polaris complained in despair, "If you don't leave, it will be too late. I don't want to go." Gently putting down the boy in his arms, Chen Yun took off his sunglasses expressionlessly, "Speaking of which, I don't have the idea of hiding behind women and living by women." Throwing away the sunglasses, Chen Yun said to the astonished Polaris, "Next. Leave it to me." After taking off the large sunglasses that could cover half of his face, Chen Yun's incomparably handsome face was revealed in front of everyone. You are." Looking at Chen Yun's face in front of him, Polaris screamed in amazement. He's a superhero. Many gangsters also recognized Chen Yun's identity, and there was a commotion in the crowd. Batman. He's Batman. How could he appear here? Glancing at the noisy gangsters, Chen Yun focused his eyes, and asked in a flat voice without a trace of waves, "How do you want to die?" "Forgive me." After hearing Chen Yun's words, the gangsters were all frightened and knelt down on the ground with fear on their faces, for fear of offending Chen Yun. But the superhero who once faced the terrifying and powerful lizardmen and slaughtered them all. Facing such a ruthless person, the little gangster dared not resist, so he could only desperately beg for mercy. "Leave us alone. Mr. Batman, I was wrong, I really know I was wrong. Please spare us. While desperately begging for mercy, some gangsters even leaked yellow liquid from their crotches, obviously they were scared to pee by Chen Yun. If it was other superheroes, maybe they would let you go. Although there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, Chen Yun's expression was extremely indifferent, but unfortunately, I am different from them. Pulling out an Asgardian long sword from the dark space of Shenwei, Chen Yun pointed at the gangster kneeling on the ground with the sword. God will forgive you, and I will be responsible for sending you to see God. Before he finished speaking, Chen Yun's figure kept flashing in the crowd, waving a long sword in his hand. The sharp sword edge cut across the heads, and the scarlet blood shot out in all directions instantly. In just 2 seconds, dozens of gangsters all died under Chen Yun's sword. Their blood flowed on the ground, as if blossoming red lotuses. Slowly wiping the blade with the black boss's clothes, Chen Yun silently watched the children who were looking at him in horror. Although facing this group of children, Chen Yun did not shy away from the process of killing him. He felt that he wanted to survive in this cruel world. These poor orphans can only face the blood and cruelty of the world. Only in this way can we learn to protect ourselves and go further. Sorry, I lied to you earlier. Sending the long sword back to Shenwei Dimension, Chen Yun walked up to Polaris. I'm not a reporter. Staring at Chen Yun raptly, Polaris was a little at a loss. She never dreamed that the boy who had been with her for so long before would be Batman. Polaris stared in a daze, making Chen Yun laugh dumbfounded. Taking out a handkerchief, Chen Yun gently wiped the blood off Polaris' nose. While wiping, Chen Yun said with a smile, if you can be more proficient in your abilities, you won't have a chance for me to make a move. Ah, aware of Chen Yun's movements, Polaris nodded blushingly. Chen, you are so strong. As the shock of Chen Yun killing the gangster subsided, the children also gathered around. Can you teach me to fight? I want to protect my sister. Yes, I want to learn too. Chen, you are so handsome. Facing the swarming children, Chen Yun was a little at a loss. Unlike the gangsters who can be easily killed, these children, just staring at him eagerly, with a look of expectation on his small face, Chen Yun was already at a loss for what to say. Puff, looking at Chen Yun, who was clumsily coaxing the children, Polaris couldn't help laughing, and a warm smile appeared on his usually cold pretty face, as if ice and snow had melted. This amazing scene naturally attracted Chen Yun's attention. Aware of Chen Yun's gaze, Polaris did not avoid it, but stared at Chen Yun with his eyes. Looking at each other, both of them felt their hearts beating wildly. With embarrassment, Chen Yun withdrew his eyes, and promised with a smile, tomorrow, I will accompany you to train your abilities. After finishing speaking, Chen Yun waved goodbye to everyone, then turned and left. Just after returning to the manor on the coast of Marbury, Chen Yun unexpectedly found a sumptuous dinner on the dining table. You're back. Seeing Chen Yun, Zhao Shiren, who was busy at the dining table wearing an apron, smiled and said, I knew you were coming back, so I made dinner for you. Thank you. Chen Yun, who was in a good mood, directly sat on the chair, picked up the bowl and chopsticks, and ate happily. Why are you so happy today? Seeing the happy expression on Chen Yun's face, Zhao Shiren couldn't help teasing, did you find money? Or did you meet someone you like? Maybe. Hearing this sentence, Chen Yun, who was eating, suddenly froze. After thinking for a while, he replied hesitantly, I did meet a pretty nice girl today. What? Zhao Shiren, who was originally smiling, froze in place, and the alarm in his heart was also going off crazily. But Zhao Shiren didn't ask any more questions, instead he finished his meal with Chen Yun calmly. After Chen Yun returned to the room, Zhao Shiren threw himself onto the sofa in a panic. Pepper, something is wrong. Zhao Shiren, with a wrinkled pretty face, was discussing countermeasures with Xiaojiali in a tense voice. Chen, are you home yet? In the room, looking at the greeting from Polaris on the phone, Chen Yun really didn't know how to reply. After racking his brains and wasting his brain cells for a long time, Chen Yun replied with the word, on the phone with a confused face. Today, thank you. Almost the second after Chen Yun sent the text, Polaris' text message came again immediately. Scratching his head in distress, Chen Yun continued to send an, Why did I only post this one word? Speechlessly patting his forehead, Chen Yun only felt that he might be showing off. Tomorrow, I will prepare a sumptuous meal for you. Looking at Polaris' message, Chen Yun gritted his teeth and decided to reweave his own language. So, he sent a good word. But this time, Polaris seemed to have been frightened by Chen Yun's cold attitude. Chen Yun waited for a long time, but the text message did not come. After staring at the phone and waiting for half an hour, Polaris sent a new message. See you tomorrow. Grinning his teeth, he also replied, see you tomorrow, and Chen Yun finally let out a long sigh of relief. It was only when he encountered actual combat that Chen Yun discovered that his implicit seduction method of seeking defeat alone was useless. Hey, sighing, Chen Yun was about to throw the phone away. But at this moment, the phone suddenly rang. When Chen Yun saw the name displayed on the phone, Chen Yun frowned. Get me out quickly, Queen. Queen, do I have this man's number? After thinking about it in confusion, Chen Yun replied with a text message, where are you? I'm in hell. Chapter 91. Hell. Seeing this word from the mobile phone information, Chen Yun immediately thought of Hela. But soon, he gave up this idea again, not to mention whether Hela, an Asgardian, can use a mobile phone. Even if she knows how to use it, there is no signal in hell. Although it was confirmed that it was a scam text message, Chen Yun thought about it, and still edited a text message and sent it. Do we know each other? After sending the message, Chen Yun directly dropped the phone, turned on the computer and played the game. After he finished playing a game of League of Legends, Chen Yun glanced at his phone. After so long, there was still no reply from the other side. A prank. Shaking his head, Chen Yun clicked on the game. At this time, in hell, Hela's angry roar was being heard. Angrily holding up the mobile phone that lost signal, Hela wanted to fall to the ground. But thinking that this was her only chance of escape other than killing Odin, she felt reluctant to give up. Sighing, Hela held the phone in her arms again. The Hela just now managed to pass through the space node that was exposed when Chen Yun left, and exhausted all his divine power to forcibly open a small hole. Only through this small hole, Hela's mobile phone has the signal. As a result, because of the lack of space elements, the small hole only lasted for a few seconds before it healed directly. If you want to open it again, you can only wait for Hela to recover her divine power before continuing to open the hole. I must go out. Thinking of Chen Yun, Hela gritted her teeth. She had to find a way to contact Chen Yun. This is the only hope of escaping hell. Hasa. Chen Yun, who was missed by Hela, was now skillfully controlling the happy man, happily playing the game. The difference from before time traveling is that because there are real superheroes in this world, the game League, once launched, became popular all over the world and became a phenomenal online game. This has also led to the fact that the funds for the entire game are extremely abundant, and new versions and new heroes are naturally released quickly. It is said that Tencent is already in contact with Captain America, the ad maniac. If it goes well, we will probably see this beautiful country's #1 buttocks log into the league soon. Skillfully blowing up and killing the opponent's AD, Chen Yun's team successfully won the game. Looking at the time, it was almost 12 o'clock. Today's luck is good, I don't know what skills will be drawn. After rubbing his hands, Chen Yun went to the bathroom to wash up. After washing his whole body, he activated his aura of luck. When all this was done, it was exactly 12 o'clock in the evening. Sign in. Ding, sign in successfully. Congratulations to the host for getting today's ability. Fantasy Embodying Technique. Fantasy Manifestation Technique, which can create objects in reality through fantasy power and spiritual power. Note: please don't be greedy. Don't be greedy. Looking at the prompt of the ability, Chen Yun was a little confused. According to the introduction, this ability should be very similar to Luo Sheng's arbitrary door, and it is realized through Chen Yun's imagination. But unlike Luo Sheng's random door, this ability has no restrictions. That is to say, if I want to, I can directly manifest anything. Chen Yun, who had a little understanding of how to use the ability, nodded, and then meditated on what he wanted in his mind. Silver and copper, round. The front is the head of the Statue of Liberty, and the reverse is an eagle. When Chen Yun concentrated his energy, he felt that something appeared in front of him. In the next instant, a coin appeared out of thin air. It really came out. Touching the brand new $1 coin in his hand, Chen Yun was overjoyed. With this ability, will I still need to make money in the future? Isn't luxury cars and mansions everything you need? Famous watches and famous cars are within reach. As long as you have money, these things that can only be seen from a distance in the past are no longer a dream. The more he thought about it, the more excited Chen Yun became. He even wished he could find a room and use his ability to copy a room full of money to calm his current mood. But soon, he calmed down again. You can directly copy the item, why use money to buy it? Realizing this, Chen Yun suddenly felt dull. This ability is an artifact, but also tasteless. With it, any limited edition item is a nightmare. A unique watch in the world. A handcrafted luxury sports car. As long as Chen Yun dared to think, all of these could be done by one person. This ability can easily make people lose their fighting spirit. Chen Yun sighed regretfully, but what he didn't realize was that the smile on his face hadn't stopped since the beginning. After experimenting for a while, Chen Yun has mastered the activation method of the ability proficiently. What? As soon as he stretched his hand forward, an Asgardian sword appeared out of nowhere in Chen Yun's hand. After flicking the sharp sword, he smiled in satisfaction, and then swung it towards the void in front of him a few times to ensure that the sword was real, before stopping. I don't know if I can replicate some excitement. After playing for a while, Chen Yun suddenly had an idea. He thought of the cosmic Rubik's Cube that existed in Shield. Quadrangle, exuding blue light, with. Just as Chen Yun was concentrating on preparing to manifest, his god-level perception began to warn frantically. It's like if you insist on realizing the Rubik's Cube, great horror will appear. Aware of this, Chen Yun decisively stopped the manifestation. The current strength is still a bit weak, and when you can disdain the universe in the future, you can come again. Thinking of myself in the future, the left and right hands wear infinity gloves, and each is inlaid with a set of infinity gems. Holding the infinity gauntlets with both hands, Thanos next door was crying. The picture is so beautiful that Chen Yun can't bear to think about it anymore. Shaking his dizzy head due to excessive mental exhaustion, Chen Yun was about to go to sleep when he suddenly saw the screen of an unclosed game on the computer. It's okay in reality, but in the game. Chen Yun's heart moved, and he immediately tried to materialize the items in the game. A bottle containing a blue liquid. This liquid can be supplemented. After thinking about it, a bottle of blue liquid appeared in front of Chen Yun. Before Chen Yun could react, the vial fell to the ground. After the vial shattered, the liquid spilled out, and the smell also dispersed into the air. Smelling the smell in the air, Chen Yun was surprised to find that his drowsy head was gradually waking up. Is this a bug of the ability? Chen Yun felt that he had found a loophole in this ability. Through imagination and mental power to materialize items, he would become listless due to the loss of mental power. But if the little blue bottle is manifested, his spiritual power will be restored. In this case, can I do whatever I want? In the end, Chen Yun did not do whatever he wanted. He discovered that every time he drank a bottle of blue potion, although he would become full of strength, his head was still groggy. This fully proved that the potion manifested by Chen Yun could not restore mental strength at all, but seemed like a potion for restoring energy. It would be great if I could find a potion that specifically restores mental strength. After thinking about it, the drowsy Chen Yun fell asleep. In today's dream, the sleep prophecy was activated again. This time, Chen Yun had two dreams in succession. The first dream was about Peter, the little spider. In the dream, a guy in a green leather jacket is flying through the sky on a skateboard and fighting Peter in Queens. In another dream, a middle-aged white man with gray temples was climbing Mount Everest. As this, the Green Goblin and Doctor Strange. After getting up in the morning, recalling the dream, Chen Yun fell into deep thought. But soon, he put it behind him. With the lessons learned from Thor's battle with the Destroyer, he is not so interested in sleep prophecy now. The ability that can only predict a certain fragment has already greatly reduced its authenticity. Peter, pay attention to the person flying in the sky on a skateboard recently. After thinking about it, Chen Yun still sent a message to Peter. As expected, Peter's call came quickly. Hey Chen. I don't understand what you mean, is there a skateboard that can fly in the sky? Wow, that's really cool. Could it be Mr. Stark's latest invention? I'll be careful, but if it's possible, can Mr. Stark make me one too? By the way, aren't you also using the transparent glass door as a slideway in the sky? Are you flying too? Was it you in the dream? See you. Hearing Peter's rapid-fire words, Chen Yun was speechless, and directly hung up the nagging phone. After hanging up Peter's phone, Chen Yun suddenly found that there were a lot of unread messages on the phone. The signal just now was interrupted. Queen. Why do you post? Do we know each other? Single quote question mark. How dare you forget me, Queen? I'm mad and I'll forgive you if you come right back and lick my toes, Queen. Is this woman crazy? Saw these messages, especially that toe licking. Chen Yun had already confirmed in his heart that the person on the phone was not a scam text message, but Hila, who was trapped in hell. Is this crazy woman so obsessed with licking her toes? Also, where did she find the signal? Shaking his head, Chen Yun ignored Hila. He didn't want to offend this woman who could crush Thor's hammer with her bare hands. Unexpectedly, Chen Yun didn't intend to ignore it, but Hela's text messages kept beeping. Why don't you reply? Hurry up and answer me. Otherwise you know I have a bad temper and a tendency to abuse people. Reply quickly. Reply, reply. These few messages successfully amused Chen Yun. Unexpectedly, this goddess of death, who is decisive in killing, has such a small woman's side. Hateful. In hell, Hela's patience has been exhausted. She looked at the phone angrily, wishing to follow the phone signal to drag Chen Yun out and beat him up. Since this is the case. Suddenly, Hela's eyes lit up. Thinking of a way, she reached out to the phone again. No, the attitude should be lower. After tentatively compiling a few messages, Hila frowned and deleted them. After a while, she reorganized her language and sent the message. Please, little boy, may I call you brother, please? Brother, help me. Hurry up and reply me. How can you bear to abandon your lovely and beautiful sister? Woo, please, please help me. 1 minute later, when Chen Yun saw the content on the phone, his entire face instantly turned black, and he couldn't believe his eyes. The dignified super sister, the strongest woman in Asgard, the goddess of death. Hila, who has so many titles, is acting cute. Not only has the name changed, but even the nickname has been changed. Little boy, elder brother. Thankfully she figured it out. Even weirder things are yet to come. After Chen Yun replied with a message of, "Why, we are not familiar with each other," the other party did not continue to send words, but sent a message with a photo instead. What the hell? Chen Yun didn't even look at it, and stuffed the phone into his pocket. He felt that this woman Hila must be playing some tricks. Chen Yun had already experienced this kind of thing in hell. However, this text message was like a bait, which kept hooking Chen Yun's heart. Forget it, let's take a look. Sighing, Chen Yun sat down on the bed again. After opening the message, a picture jumped into view. As soon as he glanced at it, Chen Yun was dumbfounded. This turned out to be a selfie taken by Hila. The Hila in the photo doesn't have the slightest look of the usual royal sister fan. Instead, he looked pitiful and pitiful. Her black hair was loose, and there were still tears in her beautiful eyes. I'll go, this is too. Looking at the photos, Chen Yun only felt that his 3 views had been challenged. Is this Hila still the noble and glamorous crazy woman he knew before? I won't be moved just because of a photo. Taking a deep breath, Chen Yun moved his eyes away from the phone with difficulty. But after he decided not to care about it anymore, the phone vibrated again. Just take a look, mainly to see what the hell she's up to. While meditating in his heart, Chen Yun quickly opened the new message. This time, the photos sent by Hila returned to her previous pretty and charming appearance. Selfies one after another, either charming or enchanting. Hela's slim and charming image is fully displayed. Great. Browsing one by one, even Chen Yun had to admit that Hila really deserves the title of the most beautiful woman in Asgard. What is this? As soon as he swiped to the next photo, before Chen Yun had time to take a closer look, his eyes were almost dazzled by the 2 huge balls. Observing intently, I saw that the Hela shirt in the photo was half untied, and Chen Yun could even vaguely see the black inside. This, as an innocent boy, Chen Yun had never had such an experience before. He was completely dumbfounded. After secretly cursing the demon girl, Chen Yun replied with a wordless. After saving the photo, Chen Yun clicked a report on the chat software. Sure enough, Soon, a text message that the other party had been banned for 3 hours popped up on the software. Call. Chen Yun, who finally calmed down, glanced at his phone reluctantly, and hurried into the bathroom to take a cold shower. When everything was ready, Chen Yun opened up his divine power space. Getting ready to go to the Polaris appointment. Bound. In a huge open space, Polaris is practicing his abilities. As Magneto's daughter, she perfectly inherited the ability to control magnetic fields. The only difference is that the current Polaris is still unable to fully and freely display its due strength. But it doesn't matter, in Chen Yun's view, Polaris has extremely high potential. As long as he works hard, he will become as powerful as Magneto sooner or later. After twisting a steel bar into a twist with all his strength, Polaris stopped practicing out of breath. At this time, her body was soaked in sweat, and her clothes were tightly attached to her graceful body. Have a drink. Seeing Polaris stop, Chen Yun immediately used the fantasy manifestation technique to directly manifest a glass of watermelon juice. After handing the watermelon juice to Polaris, Chen Yun said with a smile, "Let's take a break first. Only by combining work and rest can you get familiar with the supernatural power faster." Nodding, Polaris lowered his head and took the watermelon juice from Chen Yun's hand. I don't know if it's because of tiredness or other reasons, but her pretty face was blushed, and she looked extraordinarily attractive. It's so sweet. Biting the straw and taking a sip, Polaris' eyes lit up. Seeing the cute appearance of Polaris, Chen Yun smiled slightly. "If you like, you can drink more." While speaking, Chen Yun's cell phone rang. "Hi Chen. I've already contacted the orphanage you mentioned earlier. In order to thank you, the dean not only hung your photo on the wall, but also gave you the status of honorary dean." "Thanks, Happy." After hanging up the phone, a smile appeared on the corner of Chen Yun's mouth. Since he had money, Chen Yun entrusted Happy to contact the orphanage where he was raised. Not only paid for the renovation of this orphanage in Chinatown, but even donated a large sum of money. "Polaris, about the kids you lead. The older ones may not like to go to the orphanage, but for the younger ones, sending them to the orphanage is the best choice now. In this way, they will not only receive education, but if they are lucky, they will also be adopted by kind people and accompanied by their families." "Thank you, just do as you say." Looking at Chen Yun, who was thinking about himself, Polaris smiled and nodded, agreeing to Chen Yun's arrangement. It was almost time for lunch, and Happy drove a special plane to Queens. "Hey, are you here to eat and drink?" Looking at the fat Happy, Chen Yun joked, "We didn't prepare so many lunches." "Please, I'm just here to pick up the kids." Happy smiled bitterly and explained something, and then sat down with the opportunity. "Look, this sausage is so delicious. This is mine." Like a food protector, he dragged the plate of sausages towards him, and Chen Yun wolfed down his meal. Although Polaris' cooking skills were not top-notch, Chen Yun was very satisfied with this meal. After eating, Happy took away 13 young children. As for the remaining 2 14-year-old boys, although they did not want to go to the orphanage, they were also taken away by Happy to make other arrangements. "Wait, let's go too." Looking at the plane that was about to take off, Chen Yun boarded the plane with Polaris, who was worried about his child. "Son, welcome home." As soon as we got off the plane, the Chinese director of the orphanage, who was over 60 years old, warmly greeted us. This kind-faced old man excitedly held Chen Yun's hand, and said kindly, "Son, thank you for everything you have done for the orphanage. It's only been a few years since you left the orphanage. Not only have you grown up, you've even become a superhero." Looking at the excited dean, Chen Yun smiled shyly. "This is what I should do. After all, the orphanage raised me." After a pause, Chen Yun asked, "By the way, haven't you encountered any trouble in Chinatown recently?" "No, it's just that there are more people who come to learn Kung Fu because of you." After finishing speaking, as if thinking of something, the dean smiled and said, "Do you still remember the number 1 hit street in Chinatown? Remember, isn't that Tang Ren who claims to be a detective?" Chen Yun frowned, not knowing what the dean was talking about this idiot for. He has made a name for himself recently. The dean smiled wryly, then shook his head and said, "Although everyone knows it, it's because of his distant cousin." Hearing this news, Chen Yun was speechless. In his mind, this recently famous detective still had that lewd and slippery image. After chatting for a while, Chen Yun led Polaris around the renovated orphanage. Seeing the kind teachers and brand new classrooms in the orphanage, Polaris, who was still worried, was completely relieved. After handing over the 13 children to the dean, Chen Yun and Polaris bid farewell to the dean. The remaining 2 boys, I have arranged for suitable schools. After leaving the orphanage, Happy said to Polaris, after graduation, if they want, they can work in the Stark Corporation. Thank you. Polaris bowed to Chen Yun and Happy with gratitude. In just one morning, the things that had troubled me for so many days were solved so easily. Moreover, the places where these children go are all places that Polaris never dared to think about in the past. For these orphans, she gave up a lot. But now, Polaris, who was relieved in an instant, was even a little confused about his future. Looking at the overwhelmed Polaris, Chen Yun warmly invited, the environment in Queens is really terrible. You can live with me. Ah, live with you. Polaris opened his mouth in surprise. It's not what you think. Knowing that his words had different meanings, Chen Yun quickly explained, my house is very big, and you don't have to worry about it. I also have a roommate living with us. Hearing Chen Yun's words, Polaris froze for a moment, then asked hesitantly, then, what can I do for you? You can join my logistics team. Without even thinking about it, Chen Yun opened his mouth and said an excuse, my other roommate also does this. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, Chen Yun himself was stunned. He didn't even understand why he invited Polaris to his house so graciously. But Chen Yun could vaguely sense that he would be very happy doing this. Can I use my superpower to fight criminals with you? Polaris asked with sparkling eyes. Of course. Seeing that Polaris had no objection, Chen Yun nodded happily. We'll be great partners. Oh my god. In the evening, when Tony and Pepper came to Chen Yun's manor together. As soon as he walked in, Tony was stunned. The atmosphere in the room can no longer be described as dignified. Except for Chen Yun, who was sitting on the sofa with a stiff body and an embarrassed expression, the scene could be said to be a sheer battlefield. As soon as he entered the door, Pepper looked at Zhao Shiren. At the same time, there was an expression of hatred for the failure of Steel on his face. Shiren, what are you doing? Leaning to Zhao Shiren's side, Pepper reminded in a low voice, why is there another girl in Chen Yun's room? Zhao Shiren with an ugly face sighed, but didn't speak, just staring at Polaris. As for Polaris, he looked at Chen Yun with a strange expression. Although I heard Chen Yun mention it a long time ago, he has a roommate who lives with him. But to Polaris' surprise, this roommate turned out to be a woman. Moreover, it is so beautiful. My god, such a weird atmosphere directly made Tony restless, and he kept muttering softly in his mouth. In the end, he actually went directly to Chen Yun's side, and praised in his ear, boy, you are the real playboy. After speaking, Tony stood there with a smirk, looking at the play in the living room with a gossip. 3 women in one play, now it's really all together. Looking at the hostility and undercurrents emanating from the 3 women, Chen Yun could only shake his head helplessly. If you want to live, you have to help me. Looking away from his own Polaris, Chen Yun poked Tony's rib quietly, Polaris can control magnetism, just wave your hand subconsciously, and you will die immediately. If you intervene rashly, there is a high probability that you will die. Looking secretly at the dignified atmosphere around him, Tony smiled wryly and shook his head. Tony has long had a deep understanding of the bomb fragments in his body. If it wasn't because he wasn't used to putting his own life and death in the hands of others, he would have asked the doctor to take it out long ago. However, the appearance of Polaris also made Tony secretly vigilant. If you encounter enemies like Polaris in the future, then the result. Ouch, my heart. Realizing that the 3 ladies might fight at any time, Tony's face became more and more bitter. In order not to be affected, he could only hold back his breath, and then covered his heart with a painful expression. Under the effect of holding his breath hard, Tony tried his best, pretending to be flushed and unwell, and collapsed directly on the ground. What happened to you? Sure enough, as soon as Tony pretended to be sick, he immediately attracted Pepper's attention. Even Zhao Shiren and Polaris diverted their attention. I'm a little, touching his heart indiscriminately, Tony sighed pretendingly, I don't know why, my heart feels a little uncomfortable. Heart, hearing this, Pepper was taken aback. Although Tony never mentioned the chest injury, as the person who cared about Tony most, Pepper has always cared about it. Because of the attack in the Middle East, Tony's body was buried with a large number of ammunition fragments. And these fragments have become time bombs one after another. As long as they flow into the heart with the blood, they may endanger Tony's life at any time. Lie down. Knowing that Tony's heart was uncomfortable, Pepper didn't dare to hesitate, and quickly helped Tony lie down on the sofa. As for the drama of two women competing for a husband, she had long since forgotten about it. Tony, are you all right? Zhao Shiren also stopped staring at Polaris, and walked to Tony's side with a worried face. I'm fine, just a little out of breath. Don't talk too much, shut up and rest. With a cold face and a warm heart, Pepper patted the talkative Tony, and complained, you have been asked to go to the treatment, but you always don't go. Don't worry about it. Tony explained with a wry smile, and then turned his attention to the person who made him pretend to be sick. Chen, do you have a solution? Hearing Tony's words, Pepper also bit her lip, and looked at Chen Yun. Yes, is there a particularly safe way? There is really a way. Seeing that the three ladies finally diverted their attention away from each other, Chen Yun breathed a sigh of relief. In order to escape from the Shira field, Chen Yun didn't care whether he could do it or not. He smiled and said, the way, is it? After finishing speaking, Chen Yun manifested a glass bottle filled with bright red liquid out of thin air. Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Yun introduced with a smile, drink it, no matter what kind of surgery you have, you can become alive and kicking. I love you to death. Knowing that Chen Yun really has a solution, Tony jumped up excitedly, and quickly snatched the glass bottle from Chen Yun's hand. Holding the bottle firmly, Tony shouted excitedly, Chen, I knew you had a way. Looking at Tony, who was so smug that he forgot to pretend to be sick, Chen Yun had black lines on his face. As for Pepper, he stood aside speechlessly. After she knew that she had been cheated, her face was extremely exciting. What the hell is this thing? Tony didn't know that he had revealed himself. He looked at the glass bottle in his hand with a confused face. How should it be used? It will quickly heal any wound. Pointing to the glass bottle, Chen Yun forcibly explained, as for the use. Just drink it the moment Polaris takes all the pieces out of you. So powerful. Hearing this, Tony jumped up happily. Touching the glass bottle as if it were a treasure, Tony asked, is this made with the blood of the legendary vampire? No, it's just something I came up with. Facing Tony's abundant imagination, Chen Yun shook his head speechlessly. As for the source, it should be a certain game. This, produced by game? Tony asked suspiciously, it won't be invalid. I've done experiments during the day. Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Yun said nonsense with a calm expression. Through it, I cured an uncle who had been in a wheelchair for 10 years. If it can't be cured, it's a big deal to go back in time. Thinking of this, the unstressed Chen Yun continued to talk nonsense. He has already played football. It's amazing. Hearing the miraculous curative effect of the potion, Tony was keenly aware of the huge business opportunities in it, and he excitedly proposed, we can even start a pharmaceutical company with it. I can't guarantee the efficacy of each bottle. With this thought in his mind, Chen Yun shook his head speechlessly, and explained to Tony, this thing is not mass-produced. Haha, that's only second. Carefully holding the glass bottle, Tony laughed. The important thing is that my illness is cured. How about taking out Tony's shrapnel now? Glancing at Tony, who was still in a state of excitement, Chen Yun suddenly made a suggestion. Looking across everyone's surprised faces, Chen Yun pointed to the unknown Polaris and explained, the Polaris can control magnetism. If she is here, she can take out all the shrapnel without leaking. Nodding, Polaris agreed, yes, I can feel the shrapnel in Tony. Closing her eyes and perceiving them carefully, she continued, they are very dangerous. If it weren't for the electromagnetic device on Tony's chest, they should have entered the heart along the blood. Call, facing the operation that will be done soon and will affect his life. Tony took a deep breath and said solemnly, let me take it easy, I need some courage. Tony, holding Tony's arm, Pepper leaned her head on Tony's shoulder, I believe in you, and I believe in Chen. Thank you. Caressing Pepper's hair, Tony was silent for a moment, and finally said firmly, okay. Let's start the operation. Seeing that Tony finally made a decision, Chen Yun showed a smile on his face. He glanced at the time and said, Pepper, take the healing potion and pour it into Tony's mouth as soon as the shrapnel is taken out. Strive for a success. Nodding, Pepper took the healing potion as a treasure, opened the lid, and stood beside Tony. Please. This is heart surgery. Unlike Pepper, after hearing Chen Yun's ambiguous words, Tony was keenly aware of something, and he said with a panicked face, I can't handle this kind of thing twice. With the ability to go back in time, you will always think that there is only one time. Possessing a special ability, Chen Yun didn't explain much. Stop talking nonsense, lie down quickly. Seeing that Chen Yun's tone became serious, Tony obediently followed the instructions and lay down on the sofa used as an operating table. By the way, do we need anesthetics? When Tony lay honestly on the sofa, Pepper just thought of something and asked, don't general operations require anesthesia? Yes, where's my anesthetic? Tony, who was originally lying on the sofa, suddenly broke out in cold sweat when he heard Pepper's proposal. Although Chen Yun has always been very calm, Tony is still worried. There are no doctors or nurses, and even the operating tables are filled with sofas. Now, even without anesthesia, this is an operation related to his own life. I'll let Harpy deliver it. Seeing Tony dripping with cold sweat, Pepper quickly shouted to the intelligent AI Friday in the manner, Friday. Contact Happy for me. Tony's surgery doesn't use anesthesia at all. After waving his hand, Chen Yun interrupted Pepper calmly. Walking behind the panicked Tony, Chen Yun put his hand on his shoulder, relax, it will be over soon. Before finishing speaking, Chen Yun slapped Tony on the back of the neck. Accompanied by a burst of pain, Tony tilted his head and fell into a coma. Looking at the scene in front of him, Pepper wiped the cold sweat from his face. After Tony fainted, Chen Yun directed everyone to remove the surrounding objects. Commanding Pepper again, he took off Tony's shirt. Let's start. When everything was settled, Chen Yun said to Polaris, it's up to you. Nodding his head, Polaris walked up to Tony, with a green light shining from his hand. First carefully controlling the magnetic force, he took out the small blue energy device on Tony's chest. When the energy device was taken down, a hideous wound was also exposed. Tony, looking at this ugly wound, Pepper's eyes were soaked in an instant. But in order for the operation to be successful, she still looked at Tony with a determined face, not daring to relax for a moment. Seeing the wound exposed, Polaris closed his eyes, carefully sensing the location of the shrapnel in Tony's heart. I'm going to start. Glancing at Pepper, who was also engrossed, Polaris let out a low snort. With a wave of his slender hand, the shrapnel in Tony's body was sucked out by the huge magnetic force in an instant. What? The severe pain was transmitted to Tony's brain, and he couldn't help crying out in a coma. While the shrapnel was being taken out, blood also spewed out from the wound. This kind of wound, which was comparable to a ruptured artery, made the spurt of blood urgent and violent, spraying Pepper all over his head and face. Not caring about wiping the blood off his body, Pepper quickly poured the healing potion in his hand into Tony's mouth. Then, under the worried gaze of everyone, a miraculous scene happened. Tony's wound is stopping bleeding at a speed visible to the naked eye. The torn skin at the wound also quickly healed, and in an instant, the fist-sized hole in Tony's chest was completely healed. Seeing that Tony was out of danger, Chen Yun breathed a sigh of relief. Originally, it was just a whim on his mind, but he didn't expect it to really work. Soon, Tony woke up after the wound was healed. How does it feel? Seeing Tony opened his eyes, Chen Yun asked, is there any other discomfort? Shaking his still confused head, Tony sat up straight, except for a little pain in the neck, everything else is fine. Subconsciously looking at the time, Tony said in shock, it's less than a minute. Is the operation over? Seeing Tony's appearance as usual, Pepper, Polaris and Zhao Shiren also breathed a sigh of relief. Did I get beaten? After standing up and walking around a few times, Tony touched his still sore neck, and asked Chen Yun suspiciously, the neck still hurts. You are hallucinating. Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Yun forcefully explained with a calm face, large blood loss will make people have certain hallucinations. Pointing to the three women, Chen Yun held back a smile and said, if you don't believe me, you can ask them. Facing Chen Yun's nonsense, the three women who participated in it did not dare to expose it. They all shook their heads and laughed, and no one wanted to mention what happened just now. It can be seen, looking at the large bloodstains on the ground, as well as the taken-out blue reactor and dozens of sharp shrapnel, Tony was speechless. After a long silence, Tony breathed a sigh of relief. Touching his healed chest, the smile on the corner of Tony's mouth could no longer be stopped. Hugging Pepper, who was covered in his own blood, Tony said emotionally, "I am back. I knew, you'll be fine." Pepper's eyes were moist, and he hugged Tony's neck excitedly and said, the tears he had been suppressing were also streaming down at this moment. Patting Pepper on the back, Tony also had tears in his eyes. "For me, it's a new beginning. That's right, I'm alive again." Sitting on the sofa, Tony was talking on the phone triumphantly. "Ha ha ha, yes, I will live a very long time." In order to celebrate the arrival of the North Star, as well as their own new life. After obtaining Chen Yun's consent, Tony decided to hold a grand party in the manor. At this time, the manor has been decorated magnificently by Tony, who is not short of money. Flowers of all colors can be seen everywhere. At Tony's invitation, a group of old acquaintances arrived at Chen Yun's manor one after another. Boom! When Captain America Steve arrived, the place was already bustling. The fireworks blooming in the sky dyed the whole sky with colorful colors. Looking at the gorgeous fireworks, Steve was a little confused. After melting the ice and resurrecting, during this period of time, he has been trying to make up for the knowledge that belongs to this era. But no matter how hard he tried to make up for it, he always had the illusion of being out of touch with the times. The most important thing is that he went to see an old friend for the last time. To his regret, he could never dance the dance he promised the other party in his life. "Why can't I drink?" On the other side, Peter, who was underage, was holding a large bucket of popcorn and swinging on Chen Yun's private cruise ship. Looking helplessly at the crowd drinking in the distance, he muttered dissatisfiedly, "If only I could join the party." "Everyone, welcome to Chen's manor." Wearing a white suit, Tony Stark walked to the center of the venue holding a wine glass. Clinking glasses with all the superheroes enthusiastically, he said with a smile, "It's not too late for the dinner we promised in Queens before. Hey, everyone, you can call me Barton." After Tony finished speaking, Hawkeye Button stood up and toasted everyone with a glass of wine. "I regret that I didn't participate in the Queen's mission together. It's not too late now." Arming Barton enthusiastically, Tony drank the wine in the glass in one gulp. Then, the party-crazed Tony threw up his hands and yelled, "Now let's get high." Accompanied by the blaring music, everyone in the entire manor swayed wantonly. In the corner of the banquet, there were still a few people who did not participate in the happy activities. "Boy, you're brave." Covering her mouth, the Black Widow Natasha looked back and forth between Polaris and Zhao Shiren. Although the two girls have not spoken, Natasha can still detect the strong smell of gunpowder around them. After looking back and forth between the two girls for a long time, she suddenly leaned into Chen Yun's ear and whispered, "Chen, which one do you like?" Cough cough. It was said that Chen Yun, who was about to put the popcorn in his mouth, was almost choked to death, and coughed several times before recovering. Glancing at Natasha, he said speechlessly, I never said who I like." "Then you dare to let them live in together." Natasha rolled her eyes, curled her lips and said, "Otherwise, I'll live in too." As soon as these words were uttered, Natasha noticed that the atmosphere was a little weird, and she quickly shut her mouth, not daring to continue. Sure enough, both Polaris and Zhao Shiren turned their heads at the same time, staring at her in unison. "I surrender." Natasha raised her hand in a gesture of surrender. "I was just joking." Hearing Natasha's confession, Zhao Shiren snorted and turned her head away. As for Polaris, he pretended to be nonchalant, as if nothing had happened just now. "It's really fun." Beautiful eyes turned around the embarrassed Chen Yun, and Natasha laughed. She rolled her eyes, and suddenly stretched out her hand in front of Chen Yun. "Boy, can you dance with me?" "Oh, of course." Before they finished speaking, Polaris and Zhao Shiren looked over together again, staring at Chen Yun closely. Chen Yun shook his head and smiled wryly, "Sorry. Why did you reject me?" Natasha blinked her beautiful big eyes, pretending to be aggrieved, and said, "Is it because I'm not pretty enough?" Chen Yun rubbed his nose and coughed a few times before explaining, "I don't know how to dance." Ha ha. Natasha chuckled twice. as if she had expected it, and said, "It's okay, I will teach you." As she said that, Natasha ignored Chen Yun's struggle, and forcibly led him into the center of the field by holding her arm. Putting Chen Yun's hand on her waist, Natasha joked with a smile, "I didn't expect you to learn how to be charming in the Golden House. And there are still two." Looking at the beautiful face in front of him and the slippery feel on his hands, Chen Yun felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. Now, he can clearly feel the cold gaze coming from behind. After dancing with Natasha stiffly for a while, Chen Yun only felt that his situation seemed to be more dangerous. Further parties must not bring only ladies. At this time, Tony, who was already a little drunk, was sitting lazily on the sofa, and kept complaining, "Look, there are a lot of men and a lot of women. Is such a party still interesting?" After hiccuping, Tony continued, "You know, I have a call girl with a hot body. Tony, nee." Before Tony finished speaking, he heard Pepper calling his name loudly behind him. Even though it was far away, Tony could hear the strong warning intent. "I'm talking about Tom Cross from Time magazine. Ha ha ha." Seeing Tony, who was still high-spirited just now, was shocked for a second, and everyone laughed together. "Hey, stop laughing." Shouting in embarrassment, Tony pretended to be calm and change the topic. "Just now, except Daredevil Matthew, all our heroes are here." Taking another glass of wine from the waiter, Tony looked around and asked, "There was the media before, and they wanted to name us superheroes. I think we should settle on the name as soon as possible. Otherwise, we might be led astray by those tabloids with random names." Clearing his throat, Tony said confidently, "Our name is the Iron Legion. It's that old-fashioned name again." Hearing Tony's words, Chen Yun also stood up, and he stopped dancing with Natasha. A genius, came up with this." Glancing at Chen Yun, Tony said dissatisfiedly, "Besides, isn't Steve's veteran roaring team more old-fashioned? Hey, this is our honorary title for defending the country." The true patriot Steve also came over and retorted, "And, don't you think the Iron Legion and the Justice League are very inconsistent? Everyone, what about my spider family?" When everyone was in a stalemate, Peter, holding popcorn, appeared on the scene and interjected, "This symbolizes our unity." To shut up. Hearing this outrageous name, Chen Yun vetoed without hesitation, "This is impossible." Glancing at Peter, Chen Yun said with a smirk, "Because of your age, you are now only a reserve. Now, go eat your popcorn. This is not fair." After complaining, Peter, who had no human rights, continued to eat popcorn helplessly. "Everyone, let's put aside the matter of names for now." Seeing that everyone was still arguing about the names, Chen Yun coughed lightly twice. Immediately, everyone's eyes turned to him. After hesitating for a while, Chen Yun told everyone the future predicted in the dream prophecy, "Since everyone is here, then." Pointing to the sky, Chen Yun frowned and said, "In the near future, New York City will encounter a catastrophe. A group of vicious aliens will start from New York and invade the Earth." "What?" After listening, everyone was stunned. "Is this true?" Natasha murmured in disbelief, "Why New York?" Realizing the seriousness of the matter, she already had the urge to report to Nick Fury. What kind of alien? Unlike Natasha, Steve, a veteran, thought more about it. Hearing Chen Yun's words, his expression became serious, and he hurriedly asked, "Also, why did they choose Earth? They look like bugs, and they each ride a skateboard like aircraft." Recalling the scene in the dream, Chen Yun described, "These aliens still hold weapons that can shoot lasers. As for why the Earth was chosen, it didn't appear in the prophecy." Frowning and thinking for a while, Chen Yun suddenly remembered something. "By the way, there is also a ferocious green giant fighting them. I can see the damage done to New York by this giant in madness." The green giant. Hearing this word, Black Widow Natasha and Hawkeye Button glanced at each other calmly. "It would be nice to know the exact time." Sighing, Tony frowned and said, "We can pack a few greeting gifts in advance, and then, boom, send them to God." Shaking his head, Chen Yun said regretfully, "Unfortunately, the prophecy only predicted these fragments. Aliens are about to invade the Earth." Everyone present frowned when they heard the news. Especially Steve and the others felt extraordinarily heavy. Although they don't want to admit it, they also know that the power gap between the Earth and alien civilizations is too great. Not to mention anything else, just because aliens can create spaceships that span the universe is enough to prove their strength. Okay, now let's talk about the team name. Looking around the faces of the sad faces, Chen Yun thought of the team name that already existed. Pretending to think about it for a while, Chen Yun said, "In Nick Fury's plan, I once saw the name of a team." "What is it?" Steve, who was temporarily affiliated with S.H.I.E.L.D., asked curiously. "I think I should know." Hearing that it was Nick Fury's name, Hawkeye Barton stood up. "Is it the Avengers?" "Whoa, the Avengers," Tony said with a strange expression. "This is such an outrageous name. Do any of us want revenge?" Looking at Chen Yun with his eyes, Tony said dissatisfiedly, "Besides, I don't like S.H.I.E.L.D., I just want to do it myself." Quote, "As for operations and logistics, we can leave it to Chen." Smiling, Tony explained, "Chen should be the richest person present. Even I work for him." Seeing Tony's statement, Chen Yun shrugged indifferently, "It's fine. Cool, I want to join." When the dust settled, Peter was the first to jump out. "I'm the first to sign up." "I'm fine." Knowing that this superhero team was born to defend the Earth, Steve also chose to nod in agreement. "I want to join too, but..." Barton hesitated, but still expressed his worries. "I am an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. after all." "Please, I am also a member of S.H.I.E.L.D." Smiling, Chen Yun explained, "There is no conflict between the two teams. You can think of this as a hero club." "Then I'll join too." After listening to the explanation, Barton immediately raised his right hand. "Hey, everyone, why don't we still call it the Iron Legion?" Seeing that everyone joined the team one after another, Tony suggested again, "Listen, what a cool name." "Then it's better to call it the Stark Legion," Chen Yun said mercilessly. "Is that right, Tony Stark?" "I have no objection." With an awkward laugh, Tony also raised his hand. "You guys forgot about me again." Looking at the people discussing in full swing, Natasha rolled her eyes in dissatisfaction, and squeezed to Chen Yun's side. "Little boy, I want to join too. Of course, our team cannot lack women." Smiling and nodding to Natasha, Chen Yun looked at Polaris and Zhao Shiren again. "You will also join this team." Finally, under the call of Chen Yun and Tony, this team tentatively named Avengers was formally established. The team members inside include Iron Man Tony, Captain America Steve, Hawkeye Button and Black Widow Natasha. As for Peter, Polaris and Zhao Shiren, who were underage, they became the reserves. I don't know if this S.H.I.E.L.D. alliance, which is not under the control of S.H.I.E.L.D., will have an impact on future development. Looking at the superheroes jumping around, Chen Yun thought to himself. To celebrate the formation of the team, let's get high. Holding his glass high, Tony shouted excitedly. "Yeah." Everyone responded one after another, and then drank the wine into their stomachs. Even Peter, who was not old enough and had been banned by Chen Yun from drinking, took advantage of the chaos and had a few drinks along with him. After drinking for 3 rounds, everyone was overwhelmed with alcohol and began to pass out one by one. At the end, except for Chen Yun and Steve, everyone else was drunk. "It would be nice if I could get drunk too." As a veteran of World War II, Steve looked enviously at the drunken crowd and shook his head. As the first gathering of the Avengers, this is a successful conclusion, right? Looking at the superheroes stumbling around, Chen Yun was speechless. Tony, who is the most playful, is hugging Peter drunkenly, rolling into a ball on the ground, and muttering, "I love the Avengers." As for the others, they collapsed on the carpets and sofas, snoring deafeningly. Men can sleep directly on the sofa. What should these girls do? Looking at the girls lying on the floor, Chen Yun couldn't help rubbing his brows. Just when Chen Yun was helpless against these drunken superheroes, the system signed in by itself. Sign in successfully. Congratulations to the host for getting today's ability. 1000 cups of non-drunk sobering technique. Looking at the newly obtained ability, Chen Yun was speechless. It's 12 o'clock so soon. Touching the mobile phone in his pocket, Chen Yun thought speechlessly, why didn't the alarm clock go off? Puzzled, he took out his mobile phone, and Chen Yun found out. He left the previous mobile phone in Hella's hands in Hell, and the new mobile phone didn't have an alarm clock at all. 1000 cups of non-drunk sobering technique. Looking at the newly obtained ability with question marks all over his face, Chen Yun reacted abruptly. The system automatically signs in. Although the abilities obtained will be rubbish, there is a high probability that they will provide the abilities currently needed. You are in charge of women, I am in charge of men. While Chen Yun was meditating, Captain America Steve came over. Looking at the drunken superheroes on the ground, Steve shook his head. Let's send them to sleep first. After all, Steve used his strong body to pick up Tony and Peter with ease, and sent them back to their room to rest. Looking at Steve's back, Chen Yun came back to his senses and said with a smile, okay. Walking in front of Zhao Shiren first, Chen Yun tentatively used the newly acquired ability. A faint green light instantly entered Zhao Shiren's body. Shiren, wake up. After the green light melted into Zhao Shiren's body, Chen Yun patted her face lightly. The ability is not good, why can't it wake up? Seeing that Zhao Shiren was still sound asleep without any response, Chen Yun sighed inwardly. Shaking his head, Chen Yun walked to Polaris again. Continue to use the ability, and then pat Polaris on the head. But Polaris just turned over and didn't wake up either. What's the situation? It's clearly stated in the introduction of the ability that it can make drunk people sober. Frowning, Chen Yun looked left and right at Zhao Shiren and Polaris who were still sleeping, and his heart was full of doubts. Chen Yun, who didn't understand the situation, tried to pat Natasha and Pepper on the head with his ability. This time, the ability took effect, and Pepper woke up with a yawn. It's so comfortable. Stretching, Pepper touched his head suspiciously and said, aren't I drunk? Why doesn't my head hurt at all? Looking at Pepper who woke up smoothly, Chen Yun suddenly realized. It's not that his abilities have failed, but these three girls are pretending to be asleep. After figuring out the key points, Chen Yun remained silent. When Pepper woke up, his eyes turned around. Are they drunk? I can help you take care of Natasha. Stretching out his hand to poke Natasha, who was pretending to be drunk, Pepper said with a smile, as for those two little girls, I have to trouble you to send them back to their room. Okay. After thinking about it, Chen Yun agreed to Pepper's proposal. Facing Polaris and Zhao Shiren who were pretending to be drunk, Chen Yun didn't dare to expose them. Putting his hands on the shoulders of the two, Chen Yun took them and disappeared in an instant. Call. Looking at the place where Chen Yun disappeared, Pepper patted his chest and breathed a sigh of relief. What are they going to do tonight? As soon as Chen Yun left, Natasha opened her eyes. She stared at Pepper quietly, and said in a sassy tone, besides, you left me behind. Do not know. Shrugging his shoulders, Pepper spread his hands, expressing that he had done his best. There is only so much I can do to help Shiren. The rest, you can only look at her own. Smiling and shaking her head, Natasha murmured speechlessly, there are three of them. That's none of my business. Thinking of this, Pepper smirked foolishly, it's so nice to be young. The two women chatted for a while, only to find out in confusion that they didn't feel drunk at all. How is this going? Looking at each other in shock, both of them felt unbelievable. With the two girls Polaris and Zhao Shiren, Chen Yun didn't know where to send them. After thinking about it, Chen Yun teleported directly to his room. Throw the two girls directly on the bed, take off their shoes, and then cover them with quilts. Seeing the defenseless and pretty appearance of the two girls, Chen Yun didn't dare to stay, and found another guest room to sleep. Big Bungee Pig, Steel Straight Man. Such a cowardly Chen Yun made the two girls, who were pretending to be drunk, complain in unison in their hearts. But after Chen Yun left, the two girls suddenly realized that they were sleeping together face to face. Sensing the heat of each other's breath on their faces, the two women were suddenly embarrassed. But now that they have pretended to this point, they can only bite the bullet and continue to pretend. The next day, when Chen Yun woke up, he returned to his room immediately. Opening the door full of worry, Chen Yun found out in astonishment. Not only were the two women still sleeping deeply, but even before they knew when, their clothes had already been stripped down to their underwear. The two of them are hugging each other tightly, sleeping very sweetly. What the hell happened last night? Chen Yun's head was full of confusion, and he couldn't understand what happened. However, judging from the appearance of the two girls safe and sound, his worries were completely relieved. I took another look at the appearance of the two women's beautiful bodies, happy together. Chen Yun touched his nose and left the manor, starting his daily morning jogging exercise. As soon as he went out, Chen Yun met Natasha, who was only wearing yoga clothes, stretching on the beach. Hi, good morning, Chen Yun greeted. I have received a new mission and I am leaving soon. Glancing at Chen Yun subtly, Natasha asked with a half smile, where's your Polaris and beautiful roommate? They're still sleeping. Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Yun replied lightly, and he slept soundly. Good smell. Natasha smiled strangely and said, you didn't do anything bad, did you? Pointing to his own nose, Chen Yun said speechlessly, is my image that bad? Ha ha. With a meaningful laugh, Natasha stopped teasing, and the two started running around the coastline together. Ha, ha. After running along the beach for a long time, the tired Natasha couldn't keep up. Collapsing on the ground, she gasped for a few breaths, then raised her head and complained to Chen Yun, who was still expressionless, you are such a monster. With a snap of his fingers, Chen Yun handed the manifested bottle of water to Natasha. Natasha was not polite, and took the water directly. After taking a few sips of water, Natasha suddenly sighed, if every day can be as comfortable as it is now, how wonderful it would be. Looking at the emotional Natasha, Chen Yun shrugged, there will be such a day. Then I'm going to lose my job. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Natasha teased, at that time, I will have to rely on you, a rich man, to support me. If you eat too much, then I have to think about it. Little boy, you are so funny. After laughing a few times, Natasha rested her head gently on Chen Yun's shoulder. Adjusting his body to a suitable angle, Chen Yun pursed his lips and smiled, looking at the distant sunrise comfortably. Man, you should wake up. The black dwarf holding a huge axe was staring at Loki, who fell from the sky. When Loki opened his eyes in confusion, Black Dwarf put the axe on his neck directly. I'm not dead. Looking at the monster in front of him suspiciously, Loki said in disbelief, I obviously fell from the Rainbow Bridge. Son of Odin. With a snort, Black Dwarf smiled ferociously, you are very lucky. Patting Loki's face, Black Dwarf immediately reported to his leader that he was about to find Loki. Thanos. Let's play Aegean another way, ha ha ha. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.